Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Some context, I, a 24-year-old woman, live in a basement suite with my fiance, who is 26 years old. We live below a man and his young daughter. We're pretty friendly and look out for one another, but aren't exactly close. It's a normal detached home, just divided. We have no windows facing the backyard, just to the left and right of the house. Please note that while we live in the same house, we have had no issues other than hearing what is happening upstairs. I am also an extremely deep sleeper. Behind our backyard is a ravine, basically a tiny creek, but it's incredibly steep on either side, covered in bushes, trees, and other vegetation. It's not exactly easy to walk around in. We have a short, maybe 4 foot tall, chain link fence dividing our property from the creek. One house down there is a little path that leads down the creek and connects to an adjacent field and playground. It's maintained. There are no other paths off of the main one. It is just prickly bushes and steep, tough terrain. So now onto the story. About 3 months ago, my fiance woke me up terrified because she had heard banging outside and there were flashlights shining into our ground level windows. I instantly called 911, who promptly told me the cops were already there and probably the ones with flashlights. Annoyed, I pulled on some pants and headed outside to see what was happening. I was informed by the police the man above me had called because he stated people were on his property harassing him. They asked if we know of any ongoing mental health issues on his side, which makes me question if anything actually happened, but my fiance did hear some weird stuff before the cops showed up. All the while, I'm watching my neighbor plead with the police to check the creek out back because he swears he saw them go out that way. They briefly shine their flashlights back there and leave, determining nothing is actually going on. I get the lowdown the next day. Apparently he heard people banging on his back door, throwing gravel at his windows, and watched his front door handle turn. Man was freaked out, terrified for his daughter, and had no clue who it could be. He spends the next week barely sleeping, sitting by the back door with a baseball bat. Nothing happens, we all relax. It happens again a week later, as soon as he chills out. Same deal, fiance wakes me up, less scared because we know what's going on, but nevertheless the cops find nothing and upstairs man is freaked again. This time he installs cameras. They are on the inside of his house, pointed out the windows. They are rather small and hard to notice, and there's no way you could see them at night. This seems to do the trick. We no longer are dealing with the cops or the banging from whoever is harassing our neighbor. However, after about a month I get chatting in the yard with the neighbor and he tells me almost every single night someone has been in the creek shining a light into his windows. His bedroom specifically. Laser pointers, flashlights, you name it. It's coming from the creek. I'm a little freaked but tell myself he's overly paranoid. Could be some lights from the other side or whatever. This keeps going on. He consistently is complaining about these lights. Concerned someone is still screwy with him. And with being in the same house, last week I said screw it and bought the best outdoor camera I could afford with all the fancy night vision features. Doesn't hurt to have security cameras anyways, right? It should be arriving soon. In the meantime, I'm thinking of some way to keep someone out of the creek. Still slightly doubtful anyone could get back there without hopping our fence. I walk down the path open to public use, stop where the property fence lines start, push past a prickly bush that tries to take me out, and come across a well-worn path with footprints and broken branches, flattened bushes that have clearly been walked on repeatedly. Creeped out, I push on to see where this path goes, and it ends right at our property, right where my neighbor says the lights come from. There is nowhere else to go. The path is right next to where it drops off into the creek. I couldn't go further as it's all thick brush. It just ends at our house. Someone, for weeks, has been sitting in the woods behind our house tormenting my upstairs neighbor for no apparent reason. I am unbelievably creeped out. How do they know what bedroom he's in? How did they know when the cameras went up? Why do they never bother us? He swears up and down he doesn't have any enemies. His ex is the mother of his daughter. They share custody and she wouldn't scare her like that. I'm as baffled as I am horrified. This happened in an empty coffee shop parking lot. I was using their Wi-Fi to download movies. I thought I knew what a narcissist was up until 2 days ago. I studied it, remembered the traits. I thought I knew about 4 of them, including my parents. Trust me, there's a whole nother level of it and it'd be scary to witness if you weren't very secure in yourself, and experiencing it firsthand is a mind game. If you even think a person could not have narcissism, then they probably don't. I was able to extremely clearly detect it and somewhat to a degree of absolute certainty. I'm glad I had this encounter because what what I had previously thought about certain people was in fact completely wrong judgment. I'm sitting at a coffee shop at 6 in the morning downloading movies on their Wi-Fi. A guy in a truck parks and comes up to my car's slightly open window and asks about the price of the local homes. He's probably about 35 to 40 years old, wearing nice clothes, charming, doesn't stutter or sound stupid. I think this guy is normal, asking a pretty basic question. I'm as passive as I can be. He doesn't seem to want to leave. He's just standing there in an awkward silence after I tell him 320,000 to 500,000. He asks me who's the best builder. I'm thinking, do I look like a realtor? I tell him I don't know. He then says, you have a good long weekend, thanks. Then stuff got pretty weird and it got worse and worse. He goes into the coffee shop for 45 minutes. I'm already thinking to myself that this is somewhat odd. He's probably talking to the teenage employees. There's nobody else in there. He comes out, walks back up to my window and gives me this odd look of disappointment and says, okay, you have a nice long weekend, as if we needed to catch up from his 45-minute absence, like we weren't done talking. He then talks to someone walking by in front of my car. They know each other from years past. The person asking him, so you're back in town. I'm thinking to myself, oh wow, maybe this guy isn't the creepiest guy I've ever met. Guy he used to know leaves. He throws on his Beats headphones, walks to the tailgate of his truck, arms crossed over the back of it, resting his head in his arms, staring at me for at least 5 minutes from about 30 feet away. I glance at him every minute to see if he's still staring at me. I'm like, man, this guy's creepy. I should probably leave, but my movies weren't finished. I'm not one to be afraid of other people, so I stay. I have a combat switchblade in my door for reasons like this. I felt pretty safe because I'm me, but felt like this guy was trying to intimidate me with every lie that came out of his mouth. Inconsistencies galore. He's walking back up to my car. I'm like, what does this guy want now? We talked for 30 minutes. Or well, he did most of the talking. Within 15 minutes, this is what I learned about him without saying more than a few things like, oh, he's looking to buy a house, but he already owns 4. He has a restraining order, can't go within 100 feet of where I suggested he looked for a home. He is on the dangerous persons list, nearly yelling at me to Google it because I'm like, oh okay, whatever, father is rich because he is era, and is a retired cop. I don't believe him, not that I said anything. He reacted to my facial expression alone. He then opens his bank account on his phone and shows me $3,000. He tells me the police pay him $4,500 a month. It says $1,000 a month. I tell him it looks like they shorted you for the past 3 payments. He quickly takes the phone away, looks insulted. He says, you see that? Canadian Provincial Police. It also stands for Canadian Pension Plan, which this guy is clearly too unstable to hold a job of any kind whatsoever. He claims he was in secret operations with police, can't say what he did at all. Tells me he was with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and what kind of training they gave him at age 18, solitude in a box for 8 weeks, using the bathroom in a cup, is the main enforcer for the local notorious biker gang. This spouting off random names like I'm supposed to know them, like I care to begin with, informs me that people are afraid of him. He then asks if I'm afraid of him. This gave me a good laugh. He looked at me like he was totally insulted. People then arrived to get coffee. He states looks like the cowards are coming out of the woodwork. He then informs me that he's watching out for police, states that he is untouchable, the biker gangs have his back, then says so do the police because they don't care, which I'm not sure how that makes sense. I decided to ask if he has a family, hinting that maybe he should go be with them instead of pestering me. He apparently has 4 kids who are each hockey champions under age 16. They were trained by none other than the Toronto Maple Leafs coach. He made sure to whip his phone out to prove this, that in his contacts is someone named Blue. He makes it crystal clear who the people are to make sure I understand. I let him talk and talk until I say, well, I don't follow hockey. He realizes he's just wasted his valuable time, like 5 minutes straight explaining who the 3 hockey coaches were in order of skill, and he's pretty disappointed that I don't follow hockey. He asks me what I do. I tell him some lies saying I'm a transcriber, make $15 per hour, company name is Lion Bridge to hint that I know he's completely full of it. He types this company name into his phone saying that's good information to have, like even though he's rich and everything he needs to make $15 an hour. He asks me if I know where the best houses are in a suburb of extremely similar looking $500,000 houses. I ask if he has a realtor. He says no, I don't need one. I humor him, you want to pay in cash, don't you? Apparently everything he does is off the books, except like, you know, the pension plan of $1,000 per month. He then starts talking about a black guy violating a young girl. This is so random, I don't know what to say. I become quiet. Palms are sweaty. I'm thinking to myself something like psychopath alert. I can't even use my phone, my fingers are so wet. I'm just vaping away, blowing vapor out the window at him. He's not taking the hint. The senior aged man walks past him towards a dumpster. He says to his face, look at this chump. The old man is wide-eyed like he doesn't know what is happening, and neither do I. Old man looks at me and gives me this look of confirmation that he has completely sized up the situation that I'm in and is also thinking what is going on. The guy that informs me that he owns the town starts spouting random names again, then informs me there's a serial killer living down the street. Tells me he isn't leaving until 7:30 in the morning to not be rude to me. I'm so confused by this I just stop talking. A silent minute passes. He tells me I should leave because it's going to get loud soon. I'm now considering that this guy is here to shoot or bomb someone, possibly me. I grab my blade but leave it closed and soaking in my left hand. I ask why should I leave? He says there's a storm coming. I tell him I'm not afraid of thunder. He looks insulted. He's been speaking in covert wording this entire time, so to get a better feel for this guy I ask where he's from and if he slept in his truck last night. He looks offended like I'm the one who is off his rocker, but he doesn't say anything other than no. Another silent minute passes. He then looks at me, changes his facial expression to angry, says very calmly that if he were me he'd get out of town right now. Is he warning me or threatening me? I honestly can't tell. It takes me a few seconds to even process what he's just said. I'm not intimidated in the least, or amused. I humor him, why's that? He starts laughing his head off, walking away now and asks was that scary? I laugh and tell him an assured no, shaking my head at the absurdity of him. He's now halfway to his truck. Finally, now he's walking back to me. I flick my blade open and casually flip it in the air to invert it blade down. He fist bumps me and says you're a good guy, laughing, then walks away. He roars away in his truck, windows down, music blaring at 7:30 in the morning. I was just glad that he was gone. I just sat there perplexed at this character, wondering how many mental disorder boxes he'd check off. It wasn't even a question. This guy was trying to intimidate me in any way possible and was trying to prove his worth to me in any way possible, reacting to each of my facial expressions so quickly and in such a way that made me feel like he was sizing me up the entire time. Just glad he eventually left. I'm on holiday with my boyfriend and our dog in the Lake District. We had been for a meal and was on the way back to the Airbnb. I had had a parcel strategically delivered to a supermarket, so I went in first. Then my boyfriend went in to buy beer and some groceries whilst I waited outside with the dog. It was dark, and as it's off season, there weren't many people around. About 5 minutes into waiting on the pavement, an early 40-year-old man wearing a red shell suit type ensemble walked past. I accidentally caught eye contact, so smiled weakly, and he leered creepily back as he passed. I watched him walk away, and as he got to the end of the shop he started screaming victims. Victims. Everyone's a victim. About 10 to 20 seconds after that he started singing Take Me Down to the Paradise City where the grass is green and the girls are pretty. He went round the corner and I thought it was safe. My boyfriend was taking too long at this point, so I tried to get his attention through the glass door. I then see the same guy coming back up the road heading straight towards me. I really didn't want to have another run-in with this guy, so I went into the supermarket, completely ignoring the no dogs allowed rule, and made an animated display so that both he and the cashier knew I was there. When my boyfriend came out, I explained what had happened and pointed out the guy who was staggering uphill the direction we needed to go. I suggested we hang back and kept our distance. He turned off down a side road, and that was the last we saw of him. For the entire walk back, I was turning around to make sure we weren't being followed. Even now, as we're sat watching Die Hard, I'm really creeped out. I know I was probably in no danger, but it's a really weird thing to shout at a lone woman with a little dog. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened around 2018, right after my sister moved out of our apartment together. It's been bothering me since I just moved out. I was home alone on my day off when someone knocked on my door. No one ever visits and I have anxiety, so that was terrifying to my brain already. I answered and it was a woman who lived in one of the basement apartments. She seemed nice at first, asking if I wanted any clothes she was giving away because they were her style but supposedly matched mine perfectly as a young woman. That was already a red flag in my mind because the only time I ever saw her was when I was walking to work, wearing my uniform of a black shirt, black pants, and black hat. But I let her talk because I'm super awkward and hated being rude to technical strangers. Then she started getting pushy and listing off super expensive name brands to try to get me to go to her apartment, which is an old small building, no cameras, and I lived on the top floor, which would be down what I call the creepy stairs and next to the door to the back lot no one used. Then I realized she was holding a notebook open with a script of what to say. I continued to reject, but my anxiety wouldn't let me close the door on her face without fear of her lashing out. She kept insisting until I finally told her my boyfriend was going to be home soon and suggested she donated them. My boyfriend wasn't going to be home for many hours, but she didn't need to know that obviously. She leaves and I go back to my room, which has a window facing using that back lot / alley. A few moments later, I hear a fight happening in the lot and see her with the previous. He was already fired at that point, maintenance man. It's a loud, screaming fight, and they're standing next to his truck, which has tinted windows and a covered truck bed. My paranoia went a little wild, so I texted my family about it to feel a bit safer. Then I believe he left, but a little while later, something hits my door hard. I didn't check, just stared. Then it happened again and again, all night until my boyfriend came home, and for a few days when I was alone. I found out after looking at the door that they were hitting my deadbolt, and it was off center. Even after it was replaced, the damage couldn't be fixed. It stopped after a little while, and the woman moved out almost immediately after all of that. I don't want to feed my paranoia, but something obviously wasn't right. I know I should have called the police, but police in my town are relatively useless. Also, that maintenance man was rehired and was the one who replaced my deadbolt, insisting he kept the extra key despite never needing the old. My new house is much safer, thankfully. This is a creepy encounter that started a couple months ago and stretches to now. I live in a condo building that shares a courtyard with a sister building. One evening just before sunset, I was sitting on a bench in the courtyard that has a view into my low-level apartment, listening to music and playing Sudoku on my phone. A man walking his dog approached me. He appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s. I am a woman in my middle 20s, but did not find it that odd because his dog seemed interested in me. Without taking out my earbuds, I pet his dog, but then after a quick pet, the man was still hovering. I took out my earbuds, giving him a look of what's up. He nodded at my open purse that was beside me, which had a pack of cigarettes in it. Side note, I rarely smoke, they were in my purse left over from a bachelorette party. He asked for a cigarette, and I gave him one. He took that as an invitation to sit down next to me to smoke it. He started up small talk, asking if I lived there, how long I've lived there, stuff like that. After he finished the cigarette, I expected him to leave, but he stayed. I did not have any interest in spending my evening chatting with this guy, but I did not feel unsafe. Other people were walking their dogs and we were in view of many condo windows. I figured he was a lowly older man and it would be an easy kind deed to sit and chat with him on my Tuesday night. It got a little weird when he asked me if I'd like to come up to his apartment to try some fancy wine. He told me about how he's very into wine and a cigarette on his balcony. I told him I couldn't that night. He then asked me to text him as a way to exchange numbers because he didn't have his phone and that we could do it another time. I obliged to avoid the awkwardness of saying no. By now, it had been over an hour, it had gotten dark, and no one else was in the courtyards. He said it was nice talking. He looked forward to showing me the fancy wines, said he'd let me go enjoy the rest of my night, and he left. Shortly after, he texted me asking to plan for that Thursday night. I still assumed it was innocent and he was just lonely because the age difference. None of the conversation was flirty, and frankly I am a lot better looking than him age aside. That said, I didn't want to, so I strategically told him maybe due to tentative plans. This avoided the suggestion of an alternative date and gave me the easy opportunity to cancel. I shrugged it off as an interesting encounter and texted my friends about it. They all immediately told me it was very creepy and to cancel and not text him again. While I did not intend to go over there or text him again, I felt they were overreacting. Then I thought more about our innocent conversation and all the personal information he got out of me. He now knows which of the two buildings I live in. I didn't tell him which unit, but he could figure it out based on what he does know. The floor I live on, my unit faces the courtyard. My unit does not have a balcony, it's a rental, not an own unit. The month I moved in, and my cat likes to watch the courtyard from the window. He also now knows I live alone, my age, where I work, my past few employers, the suburb I grew up in, where I went to school, both high school and college, where my parents live, and my phone number. I didn't think I was stupid, but now I'm surprised I didn't give this guy my social security number. That said, he got this information out of me because he also shared all these details about himself. That, along with him living in the sister building, not mine, made me feel better. But then I remembered the sister building's fobs work to access each other. I also then remembered he told me multiple times he does not carry his phone or wallet on him while he walks his dog at night because of all the muggings. When he kept bringing this up, I found it very odd because we live in one of the safest neighborhoods of the city, but shrugged it off. I now am scared he may have bad intentions and wanted to persuade me into putting myself in a vulnerable position without my phone. I tried reverse searching his number and nothing came up. I was smart enough to read his last name from his dog's collar, and I googled it with the first name he gave me. But even with all the other information he gave me, like his job and education, I could not find him online. This left me a little unnerved, but his response to me canceling was just to text him another time when I am available. I felt better about it until the next next Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week down to the hour of us originally meeting. I looked out my window and saw him sitting on the exact bench we were on, one of like 20, staring up at my building. He wasn't even with his dog or smoking, just sitting there looking up at my building. I immediately dropped to the floor and peeped only my head to take another look out the window, which starts a couple feet above the floor but stretches the whole wall horizontally. It was definitely him, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. I still excused it as maybe innocent, maybe he hoped to run it to me again and was just waiting, not spying. But in the weeks following, I saw him on that bench multiple more times. I've been avoiding the courtyard and keeping my blinds closed, but they can't be closed 24/7. Apart from me, both my cat and plants need the natural light. A couple weeks ago, my blinds were open and I had to pass the window naked to retrieve a towel. As I passed, I looked out the window. Not only was he on that bench, without his dog or a cigarette, looking up at my building, he was looking straight at my unit and my window at me. I again dropped to the floor. I grabbed the blanket next to me, wrapped myself in it, and stood back up. He was still staring. We held eye contact and he did not look away. Eventually, I closed the blinds, but he knew I knew and he was not shy about it. A few days after that, I saw him in my building lobby. I ignored him and he ignored me, and I quickly got into the elevator. I then left for a 2-week vacation. I got back a few days ago and haven't seen him. I'm hoping the time gap bored him. In the early 2000s, I was skateboarding outside of my old elementary school with a close friend. We were 12 or 13 at the time, and skateboarding can be a draw for police, and we were well aware of that. Being harassed by a running from cops was nearly a weekly occurrence for us around that time. After we had been there maybe 20 minutes, a new-looking unmarked Ford Ranger or maybe Mazda equivalent drove by, slowed down, and turned into the parking lot after noticing us. He got out and asserted he was a police officer and that we could get in a lot of trouble. He was wearing plain clothes, white, and probably in his 30s or 40s. He approached me, patted me down, obviously noticed something in my cargo pocket. It was a weed pipe. I was scared that I was going to get busted and I froze. He ignored the item in my pocket, along with whatever else was in there. I don't remember if the touches were weird in nature or focused on any one area of my body. He didn't bother searching my friend. He didn't ask any questions that I remember other than whether or not our parents knew we were there. I don't remember what we answered. Knowing us and our parents, they probably did have at least a vague idea of what we were up to. It is likely we said yes, but I seem to remember telling him no. He began to conclude the interaction and said something like be safe or you should probably go home now. Anyway, he got back in his truck. I remember seeing the cab after he opened the door and it looking like a mess inside. There was trash and signs that he was not driving an official vehicle of any capacity. I do remember thinking that was odd at the time. He left. We went on our merry way after I landed that kickflip down the 3-stair or whatever trick I was working on that day. The situation felt a little odd, but I didn't tell my parents. I was a teenager with more angst than most, after all. Plus, bringing it up would have surely invoked some lecture or accusation regarding drug use, and I was not about to bring that upon myself. Years later, my friend brought it up. He said he had mentioned it to his dad recently. His dad was a police officer at the time of the incident. His dad got upset and was dumbfounded by the fact that neither one of us told anyone about it. Now that I'm knocking some of this loose, I think my buddy actually told the guy his dad was a cop, and that is when he began disengaging. That was the day I realized that if I had been alone, things could have gone much worse. It was over 20 years ago, but I still wonder if I should report it in case it could lead to some sort of resolution for someone who was not as fortunate as we were. This happened about a week ago, so I had biked to school with my best friend. We were going to stay after school to work on a project together anyway, so it worked out. On our bike ride home from school, we decided not to go straight home and that we wanted to go on a small bike ride down a path by the park that will lead us back to my house anyways. When we were unchaining our bikes from the bike racks, I noticed like a red Dodge Dakota across from the school. Just for your information, we live in a pretty small town, so most of the kids who get picked up, we know of what cars they get into and what cars hang around the school at pickup time, as well as what cars the teachers and students own that drive themselves to school, or at least somewhat of an idea, but I usually didn't see that one, and it was probably like an hour and a half past the time school got out, but it could have been someone's relative picking them up or whatever, so I really didn't think much of that. We started biking towards our path, and after about 5 minutes my friend told me the red truck was driving on the road next to the sidewalk we were biking on, but it was a little behind us. I told her that it's probably fine and a coincidence and that they are probably going home or live around here, so we kept going. But he didn't stop. After about 10 more minutes of him still following us, then I started getting a little concerned. We ended up continuing until we got to a gas station because then at least there would be people around and less of a chance of something happening. So we we parked our bikes and went in. We grabbed drinks and a snack to not make it look odd that we were in there, but while we were in there I called my brother to come get us and that there was someone following us. He told us he would be right there and to just stay inside. So we did. We paid for our snacks and told the cashier about it, and she let us just sit there until my brother came. My brother pulled in, and so we walked out to get our bikes, but we couldn't find them. We looked around and saw the red truck pulled behind the gas station with our bikes right next to it. The man that was driving it was looking right at us. We went and told my brother. He said forget about the bikes and get in the car. So we did. My brother got out of the car and went into the gas station to get the employee, and while he was doing that, the man sped off out the back parking lot of the gas station. When my brother came out, he said that the gas station worker was going to check back the cameras and see if she can get a license plate to give to the police, and that my brother gave her our mom's information for any updates. We both made it home safe. I'll keep y'all updated when we find out more. I'm not sure how creepy this actually is, but I always try and play it safe. I don't believe in taking chances, and I don't intend on becoming another statistic. If that means playing on the side of caution, then so be it. I'm a bartender by trade. I've been working in bars since I was 21. I'm 29 currently and female, so I've had to pick a thing or two up. I get a fair amount of unwanted attention in my day-to-day life. I'd say about as much as the average woman gets. I'm not a vain person, but I do put a lot of attention into my wardrobe, my makeup, and my nails. I know it's such a sideways way of thinking, but most of my money is made on tips, and I have to make myself presentable enough. But because of this, I do set my boundaries very strongly. This doesn't mean that I'm perfect though. I'm still a person with people urges. It was a typical Saturday night. The bar that I currently work at, and the one I've been working at for the past 2 years, is a pretty small bar with more of an emphasis on the quality of the drinks and the relaxed atmosphere. I don't serve as many Vegas bombs or Bud Lights that I have at previous bars that I've worked at. It's mostly cocktails and craft beers. This usually keeps the rowdy crowd out. On Saturdays we do trivia night, which I occasionally get tasked with hosting. It's not my favorite thing to do, but something I have to do as per my job description. There was a girl in the crowd that was answering most of the questions I sent out. She wasn't alone and came in with a group of people, all seemingly in their middle 20s. Her and I ended up talking for a while at the bar in between serving drinks. She was flirty, which isn't something I'm incredibly good at, but she was sweet. And just to make it clear, I have an equal preference in men and women. I wasn't trying to lead her on or humor her for the sake of making tips. In the crowd of trivia participants came this one guy. I wasn't the one to identify him, so I couldn't tell you his name. He began making rude remarks from one bar stool down from where this girl was sitting. He was somewhere in his 30s. It seemed like he was hitting on her, but she didn't seem very responsive. I told him that she didn't seem interested and then he should stop. He apologized with a very sinister looking smile and looked down at my chest, claiming he was looking for a name tag to formally address me. We don't have name tags. I told him that if he continued making people uncomfortable, he would be removed. One thing I took notice of that made me sufficiently uncomfortable was the fact that he kept one hand in a jacket pocket, just the one, and he seemed to be fiddling with something. I don't play around with this kind of stuff, so I told security about it. While I was walking back, I overheard him telling another bar patron that I basically told him I would sleep with him when I got off of shift. The girl from the bar, as well as the random bar goer, told him that his behavior was out of line. I told him that he needed to leave and that security was going to kick him out. His response changed from sinisterly playful to outright agitated. He made a comment about my sexuality and told the random bar guy he was sitting near that he was a homophobic slur. I hate guys like this with a passion, people who want to disrupt the comfort of others in some half-hearted attempt at getting laid. I walked from behind the bar and told him to leave and tried again to flag security. He made a very crude comment about me letting him do some stuff to me, and in return I wouldn't feel the need to be attracted to women unless it was a, let's just say, group effort. The girl that I had been talking to threw a glass of scotch in his face, then headbutt him in the mouth. Security finally came running, only to try and kick her out. I flew into a rage over that and told him that the girl was good and she was only doing the job that he was supposed to be doing. He was removed from the bar. I kept an eye on him through the window. He stuck around near the bar for a bit, but after an hour or so he left. The girl offered to stay with me until closing, which wasn't necessary. I'd closed the place down so many times at 2 to 3 in the morning, but I gave her the "oh, would you please" brutality. I also give credit where it's due, so I gave the other guy from the bar a good thank you hug before he left and told him that he made me feel safer. The girl told him the same, and I told the manager and the owner that we had an issue with the customer. Bar camera footage was pulled and his identity was confirmed. He had an issue with getting banned from bars and had a tendency to start fights while intoxicated. I hate to say it, but I'm still keeping an eye out for him. Not sure if this is creepy enough, but it was for me. My girlfriend and I were graduate students living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments. The whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had a laid-back, bohemian vibe. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. It was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was past 3 in the morning. I had just finished a movie. I turned the television off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm, and the ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder, and it was freezing scary cold. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend was always complaining about me forgetting to lock the door, and, as was my habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed, and just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. Moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking. Now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I heard something. Then we both heard what sounded like someone stumbling into our couch. We shot up, and I yelled, "Is someone there?" No answer. The floor creaked again. This time, in unison, we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise. I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon. Nothing. Growing up, my dad always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting this practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time, from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if one of my buddies was playing a prank on me. That seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour on a weekday night, and during a snowstorm. What I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in. My girlfriend yelled, "Who's out there?" More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to our bedroom. We heard the growl again, but this time it was followed by a gurgle, and it's Matt. We didn't know anybody named Matt, at least not any that would enter our apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend. I'd never seen someone so scared. If worst came to worst, I thought to myself, I know I can outrun this person. I hoped it didn't come to that. "Matt who?" We shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over both of us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. I turned on the lights and walked into the family room. There he stood, a 6'2", slovenly looking college kid. Matt was blacked out drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pre-game party at their apartment, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartment. Their door was locked, and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he had sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment he could find. I told him that he scared us and that he had to go. He stepped outside, and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, I learned that Matt froze to death. He'd been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean-to garage. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what happened to Matt. I do, however, remember being a little concerned for him after my nerves settled. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Our dogs honestly saved our lives this night and deserve some recognition. So this whole thing happened when I was maybe 12. I am nearly 17 now. Lee and my sister, who was 14 or 15 at the time, were staying home alone while our parents were at my little brother's hockey game. We lived in a fairly safe neighborhood. Hardly anything ever happened, everybody knew everybody, and almost everyone got along well and liked each other. So we felt safe as we didn't have a reason not to. Our front door was locked. Our back door was locked, but our side door didn't lock. It was broken, but no one ever used it anyway, so my dad hadn't gotten around to fixing it. Lee and my sister were in the living room watching television and doing homework when we heard the fence outside of our house making some noise. It sounded like someone had jumped over the fence. So my sister looked through the blinds, and sure enough, someone had jumped the fence. 2 people actually. They were dressed in mostly black with like a hospital mask over their faces. We freaked out and hid in between the couches in the living room. When we heard the front door knob wiggle, of course it was locked so it didn't open, but we knew whoever it was would go to the side door next, and that one would open. In that moment, I was the most terrified I had ever been. But once the door handle started jiggling loud enough, my dogs had woken up. At the time, I had a Tosa and a Rottweiler. Once one started barking, so did the other one, and eventually it was just pure chaos. That's when we heard them scream they got dogs. Then we heard the fence make the same noise, as if someone jumped over it again. Later that night, a local gas station near my house got robbed by 2 armed men, and the news reports showed the same people we had seen, same outfits and everything, except this time we got to see their faces. Our dogs truly may have saved our our lives that night. The funny thing is, our dogs are the biggest lovers. They may be loud and bark, but they wouldn't bite or attack anybody. This is the one time I'm very glad that these dogs breeds are associated with being quote scary and aggressive, because clearly they scared off whoever wanted to break in that night. So me, a 28-year-old woman, and my husband recently relocated to a small town for work. The area is known to have high criminal activity and a lot of homeless people, but I am not usually scared or paranoid. I decided to go thrifting, hoping to find a baby safety gate. Once I got to the store and parked, there was no one in the parking lot. I went in. Right behind me entered a large, well-dressed male that was persistently eyeing me head to heels. At first, I didn't think much of it, and I just went on checking the book section they had. After a while, I started to feel as if someone is hovering around me. I started to feel a bit anxious because every time I would look behind me, the guy would be standing way too close to me, literally not looking at any books, just pacing around, and would look to the ground to avoid my stance. I am not a shy girl. I know how to stand up for myself when needed, and I know better than to make a predator feel like he is intimidating me. I turned around and gave him a screw-off look and went to the other side of the store to shop, and right behind me followed the creepy guy. I tried not to mind him and continued looking through clothes, vases, and decorations, and wherever I would go he would follow in a very creepy way, keeping himself as close as he could be to me. 40 minutes in, the employees noticed that the guy wasn't interested in anything, and they asked him if he was okay and if he needed anything specific. He said no and brushed them off with a story. He was persistently following me, and he tried to corner me in an unseen part of the store. I looked him in the eye with a "don't mess with me" look until he broke eye contact, and I turned away and paced as fast as I could. Of course, he was right behind me, pacing as fast as I was. I messaged my husband my location and sent him the description of the guy and told him what was happening. He told me to get out of there safely as fast as I could and call the police if needed. I then asked the employees if they had any gates around. He answered me from behind before they even had the chance to open their mouths. Then the employee took me to show me what they had available. Of course he followed us. I then went to pay for my stuff and asked the guy working there to walk me to my car because I was just not feeling safe, and I was sure that the creepy guy would try to hurt me or try to steal from me. My first thought was he saw me park outside and ran after me, hoping to jump me and steal from me. I drive a fancy 2023 model truck. My husband believes that he just wanted to hit on me but didn't know how. I've lived in 3 different continents and had my share of deprived creeps and psychopaths, but I am not sure what to think of this. Not sure if I overreacted. My husband thinks I did, but I still cannot understand what his intentions were, hoping to get closure from this. I go a log box here my home most nights. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood. It's a huge grid of residential streets, in the middle of which is a big open park type area, larger than 2 football fields, that's next to a school. Last night, around midnight, I was walking on the sidewalk next to the park, listening to a podcast, slowly making my way to the school. The school has a big, well-lit parking lot in front, with 2 entrances/exits about 25 yards apart. As I neared the school, I noticed a car in the parking lot with its headlights pointed toward the street. This is unusual for this time of night, especially on a weekday. Maybe it's a cop, I thought. I got closer and saw that it was a beat-up red truck. It had started slowly and aimlessly driving around the lot. As I passed the first entrance, the truck seemed to notice me and stop. I got halfway to the second entrance when the truck rushed toward it. I assumed the driver wanted to pull out before he had to wait for me to cross. No, the truck just sat there. I leaned as I approached. I got to the entrance and saw that the truck was occupied by 4 men. I motioned to the driver to go ahead, but while looking straight forward, he just motioned with his hands for me to cross. At the same time, I noticed a guy in the backseat staring at me menacingly. I crossed in front of the truck, expecting the driver to blow the horn or rev the engine, basically, to screw with me. He didn't. They just sat there, watching me. I continued down the road, and as I was turning right onto another street, the truck exited the lot, turning in the opposite direction. Just a strange encounter, I thought. A few minutes passed, and I saw the same truck approaching me. Getting to me would have required circling the park and traveling down 3 additional streets. And to do it so quickly would have required serious speeding. The truck slowed as it approached, almost stopping as it got to me. The occupants stared daggers at me as they passed. It felt like they wanted to do something but lost their nerve. Now I'm a little freaked out. I'm not a paranoid person, so I started rationalizing their behavior. I told myself they're just cruising around, enjoying some weed before going home for the night. That wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for my friends and me in high school. These guys looked too old for this, though. My gut insisted something was wrong. Out of an abundance of caution, I walked a little down the street and crouched behind a big oak tree surrounded by bushes on some random person's property. I know this is inappropriate and possibly dangerous. I hope the homeowner wasn't watching me from his Ring doorbell as I lurked on his property. For a couple of minutes, I crouched there before I saw headlights. It was just the neighbor from across the street arriving home. He entered his house, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I actually felt pretty embarrassed. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard the rattling of an engine and saw headlights slowly moving down the street. It's the red truck. I'm sure I imagined it, but I thought I heard its brakes squeal right before my hiding spot. I wondered why this truck was apparently speeding to get to me and slowing when it arrived. It didn't seem like chance, and I'm now convinced this truck is seeking me out. I started running as soon as the brake lights disappeared. I'm a little more than half a mile from home, and I'm not taking any chances. As I turned onto the street that intersects with mine, I saw headlights and heard a familiar engine rattle. I can't say with certainty that it was the red truck, but I immediately turned around and ran to the side of another random house. Making things more ominous was the spooky music and witch's cackle coming from the Halloween decorations next door. I waited another minute, making sure the red truck didn't pass, and ran the rest of the way home. I walked in out of breath, and my wife asked me what happened. She scolded me for walking so late at night after I told her the story. The middle-aged woman is strong with her, so she immediately pulled up the Nextdoor app. Apparently, there have been several reports of car break-ins in our area attributed to men in a red truck. It's probably not connected, and I was almost certainly being dramatic. I doubt anything would have happened if I'd encountered the red truck again. Still, I'm glad I did it. Please bear with me as this story is quite lengthy, but I hope you find it worth the read. I'd also like to emphasize that I've purposefully left out identifying details to protect the privacy and respect the memory of the victims involved. If you happen to know the real life events behind this story, I ask for your discretion and understanding, as the purpose of sharing it is for my own catharsis and reflection. Thank you for your consideration and respect for the victims. In the heart of that Southern University town, where the campus and the local community intertwined, I embarked on a fateful night that would haunt my memory for years to come. I was just 20, a junior in college, eager to savor the newfound thrill of going out to bars with friends who, like me, possess fake identifications. The atmosphere was charged with youthful energy, and I reveled in the attention from guys who were more than willing to buy me drinks. It was my first taste of such attention, and I played it up, basking in the newfound allure of adulthood. As I headed to the bar to procure another round of drinks for my friends, I encountered Jay, a man who would cast a sinister shadow over that night. He was a townie, one of those locals we often referred to with a mix of condescension and pity. In this college-centric universe, many townies were drawn to the bars, their troubled lives intersecting with the students' carefree world. Jay didn't seem particularly ominous at first. He struck up a conversation with me, bought me a drink, and we engaged in a seemingly pleasant exchange. But as the night wore on, he grew increasingly agitated when I declined to give him my number. His mood shifted, and he began making a scene, prompting my friends to intervene and extricate me from his presence. Yet, even as we distanced ourselves from him, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that his predatory gaze never wavered. It wasn't the gaze of someone interested in romance, it was a chilling, haunting stare. Desperate to escape his unsettling presence, I decided to join the guy I was seeing at the time, who was at a bar just across from ours. These bars were mere feet apart in a pedestrian mall, so I thought nothing of going there alone. My car was parked conveniently nearby, and I took refuge inside to charge my phone for a few minutes before heading to meet my friends. But as I sat there, I heard the car door open. It was Jay. This stranger had followed me from the first bar and now sat in my car as if we were old friends, oblivious to the terror he instilled in me. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of how to react. He seemed alarmingly normal, completely unaware of the distress he was causing. It was a situation that grew scarier by the second as I realized the gravity of the peril I was in. Thankfully, within what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a couple of minutes, the guy I was seeing flung open the car door and asked if I was okay. Relief washed over me as I explained what had just transpired through tears, my voice trembling with fear. He had arrived at just the right moment, a guardian angel in the darkness. His presence sent Jay packing, like a child who had been caught misbehaving. If it weren't for his intervention, who knows where I would be now, and what sinister plans Jay might have had in mind. A year later, it resurfaced in the most chilling manner possible. A fellow junior, Holly, went missing, sending shockwaves through the campus and making national headlines. Search teams scoured the area, and the nation held its breath as they discovered security footage of her leaving a bar, followed by a man, Jay. The search ultimately ended in tragedy as Holly's lifeless body was found. The police investigation led to the capture of her killer, and it sent shockwaves through the university community. Jay had not only taken Holly's life, but had also been responsible for the deaths of two other girls, making him a serial killer. Witness reports, news articles, from those who last saw Holly say she was telling Jay, "I will not get in the car with you." Jay is currently serving 4 separate life sentences. I had never shared this haunting experience with anyone beyond my closest friends and husband, fearing judgment and repercussions from my conservative upbringing. But now, returning to that town, the memories resurfaced with a vengeance. Some scars never truly fade, and the night when I narrowly escaped the clutches of a killer named Jay remains etched in my memory as a chilly reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most seemingly ordinary places. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This has been ongoing and I can't decide if I'm overreacting or not. I've worked at my job for 6 years, very small manufacturing plant. All that time we've had the same janitor come in the afternoons. When I was first hired, he'd come in my office to clean and I always said hello and thanked him, but he never said a single word back. I heard him speak to my boss as normal as anyone once or twice, but never to me. That got uncomfortable, so I stopped saying anything and I started leaving my office when he'd arrive. Eventually, I didn't need to leave my office because he changed his routine and did mine when I was gone for the day. The past year, whenever I walk past him and get out of view, he lets out this cackle. It's weird, uncomfortable, and puts me on edge. Others have heard him do this and have pointed out he's only doing it when I go by. There are times I've avoided getting something I needed because he's cleaning in the space I need to get it from. Last week I was leaving work and my coworker caught him peeking around the corner of a narrow hallway near the exit, so she stopped and waited for me. As I approached where she was and happened to look down that hallway, he's standing still in the middle of it in the dark, staring in our direction. I told my boss about the hallway and the other laughing incidents. He said he'd run a background check to see about him and to make sure I'm not the last to leave the building anymore, not that I ever was. I told him I didn't feel threatened, but that these instances are odd and only happening to me, so it's not comfortable. Am I overreacting? My gut says something is off. For context, I'm a man in my late 30s and was 18 at the time of this story. 20-something years ago this month I moved to London to attend music college. Most of my other friends were still doing their A-levels, but I sacked those off in favor of an opportunity to study drums and percussion, which I'd already been teaching myself for 10 years at that point in the big city, and to escape my sucky rural hometown. It was the last day of the last term of our year-long course, so everyone ended up at the pub to celebrate. It was a fairly rough pub, but the nearest one to our college, so it was always a weird mix of shifty locals and annoying music students, myself included, and this night was no different. Everyone was doing karaoke, which at the time I was just too awkward to take part in, particularly in front of a pub full of people. I was getting bored and wanted to leave, but was staying with one of my fellow drummer friends who lived a lot closer to the pub than I did. Things were starting to wind down, so I told my friend I'd meet him outside once he'd finished making out with one of the vocal students. I went and stood outside on the street next to the pub by some fencing, behind which were some garages of nearby council flats. I chain smoked a few Marlboro Reds, knowing my friend was going to take his sweet time. As I was standing there, I saw a shifty looking guy in a hoodie with chin-length dreadlocks approaching from afar. As he passed me, we made brief eye contact, but I thought nothing of it and continued smoking. A few minutes passed and I heard what sounded like some sort of rustling or footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the same guy on the other side of the fencing. He was walking towards the garages but kept looking up at me. This felt a little strange, but I just assumed he was just a weird guy who lived at one of the flats, so I turned around again and continued smoking. After a few minutes, I was a little curious as it had sounded like the guy's footsteps had stopped quite abruptly shortly after I turned back around, so I looked around again to check if he was still there. To my absolute bewilderment, I saw the guy now sort of crumpled in a pile on the floor with his back against one of the garages, trousers round his ankles, his thing in hand, just going ham on himself whilst giving me the most intense eye contact. I swung back around in shock, completely unable to process what I'd just seen. I was frozen and had no idea what to do. About 20 seconds passed and I heard the zip of his fly, then the sound of footsteps growing louder and I knew he was approaching me. The footsteps stopped. "Excuse me," the guy said in a soft and nervous sounding tone. I turned around. "Yeah, what? You're not gay, are you?" No." The guy, almost blushing, says, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," and hurriedly walks away. For years I used to retell this anecdote as a funny sort of "oh my god, that's outrageous" story. It didn't really dawn on me for a long time how messed up that event was, I think in part due to when it happened, early 2002, and the fact I'm a man, so most people wouldn't immediately think of me as someone who would get flashed at or harassed or be exposed to. It was only in the last 5 years or so, with the increased awareness of that kind of behavior, I started to reframe it a little. context, I conduct bystander intervention trainings and have an excellent sense of when I feel uncomfortable versus unsafe. I have trained in conflict escalation techniques. I've also taken a self-defense course and feel comfortable using those skills if necessary. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, but usually people guess my age around 16 to 18. Event: I had already been in Marshalls for a while, and having finished trying on clothes, I decided to check the men's section for my partner before heading out to run my next errand. While looking through the racks, I began to notice that someone was following me through the racks and watching me closely. A young man, probably aged 18 to 21, would walk down the aisle a little ways behind me, then pass by me very closely, much more closely than the aisle width required. After having this happen 2 or 3 times, I made eye contact with him after he made his pass, and he said sorry. I first assumed that he was interested in taking my purse and or taking something out of my purse, so I kept a closer hand on my crossbody bag. After having said sorry, he kept his distance for a few minutes, and I continued browsing. However, he shortly approached me and held out a piece of printer paper with an image of his driver's license, a vertical under 21 license, and asked me, I just got my license photo taken, do you think it's a good picture? I said, yeah, it's a perfectly good photo, and moved on. At this point, I was getting a little weirded out, but there were plenty of other people in the men's section, so I wasn't particularly concerned yet. Shortly after, as I approached the end of the men's section, he approached again and asked, can I give you a hug? I responded, no, thank you. He asked, why not? And I responded, I don't really feel like giving a hug now, thanks. Then he said, I'm not a danger to you. I responded, I know, I'm just not interested in giving someone I don't know a hug. He went away to another part of the men's section again after this, and I finished looking through the rack. At this point, I was starting to feel deeply uneasy, but continued to play it cool in order to not escalate the situation. While I was browsing the last rack, he came back again and asked, can I follow you around while you shop? I responded, no, thank you, I prefer to shop alone. He responded with his usual why, and I let him know again that I prefer to shop alone. He left again, and at this point I was so thoroughly freaked out that once I made sure he was walking away from me and not looking at where I was going, I left the store and exited onto the strip. He did not follow me, and I entered the neighboring Ross to wait things out. I immediately texted my partner, who was at a conference hosted at one of the casinos. So my question is, what happened here? My partner and I have a couple of theories, but I'd love to hear if anyone else has experienced something like this or knows of other experiences like this, especially the showing the license thing. We can't really figure out what that was for. Theory 1, bad pickup artist. The game tells men that they should use props to try to pick up women. Was this just a really bad attempt at trying to hit on me? Theory 2, I almost got abducted. Israel Keys attempted to abduct a woman from a Marshalls in the late 90s using a similar technique, staring at her for a long time, then asking her how old she thought he was. Kelsey Smith was abducted and murdered after being followed down the aisles in a Target, then followed out to her car. These instances feel eerily similar to what I experienced, and during the encounter, my unsafe alarm bells were definitely going off. I was ready to fight this man in the Marshalls if necessary. I don't believe trafficking was at play, since trafficking rarely involves getting snatched off the street by a random person. However, I'm not entirely closed off to that idea either. Please check out Polaris Project for more information about trafficking. I, a 29-year-old woman, have been hiking at a wooded trail near my house for about 3 years now, and it's my favorite trail due to the beautiful waterfalls and meadows, but had several creepy encounters over the years. Luckily, I always hike with my 90-pound Bernese, Baker. He's the sweetest boy, but will protect me. First encounter was 3 years ago in the winter when I was walking up a hill and Baker starts growling unlike I've ever heard. I look around and realize there's a man in the shadow of the woods watching us, and when I notice him, he starts walking slowly towards us with his head covered. I said hello as usual, and he didn't respond. I kept walking and got a feeling that I should turn back. When I did, I realized he had turned around on the trail, middle of the hill, so not a common turnaround point, but once he saw me, he walked into the woods and stared out at the valley hugging a tree, so nothing too crazy, but it just felt off. Around the same time a year later, Baker and I are walking on the same trail, and again, Baker starts growling. Usually he is very excited to meet anyone or anything. I realize there appears to be the same man standing off in the shadows watching us, but I figured maybe Baker just scared him, so he was standing away from us, waiting to cross the bridge. Otherwise he easily could have kept walking along the trail instead of waiting for us. miles. They cross the bridge and keep walking. I again get a feeling that I should turn around. When I do, I realize he is behind us, so I had no reason to be waiting for us to cross the bridge. I sit down with Baker by my side and pull out my phone while making it clear I've seen him, not staring, just glancing in his direction. He stops when I turn around, even though I'm off the trail and not in his way, but continues walking after I pull out my phone. I start walking back and find a large stick he had left that had been sharpened with a knife into a spear. I take the spear and continue walking while looking around me the entire time. I know now I should have reported it at this point, but I just convinced myself I was being paranoid. About a year later in the winter, I'm walking along the same path, maybe stupid, but I took a year off and again just convinced myself I was paranoid. It's snowing with the trails mostly empty, and I suddenly see a bunch of trees with frowning faces made out of snow, despite not seeing anyone on the trail for miles. Baker again starts growling at something in the woods that I can't see, so we turn around. I don't report it because I figured it would never be taken seriously. Then today, a few months later, I'm walking along the trail and find a tree with "I see you" written in chalk. I immediately get a weird feeling and turn back and report it to the park rangers and police. Update: I'm working with park rangers to keep an eye out. After sharing in my hiking groups on Facebook, several women have come forward with similar experiences at the same place. One woman was stalked by a man in a full snowsuit in middle of July on this trail. Another was followed all the way to her car within appearing along the trail, watching her from the woods at various points. Update 2: 6 different women have come forward with similar experiences with a similar looking man at the same park. They've all reported it to the rangers. I interviewed with the local news. They reached out to me and it's everywhere. Rangers are not happy with me for sharing with the public, but that's fine with me as everyone has a right to know. Someone whacked off the "I see you" message before the news team could see it. It rained, but not that heavily. 3 separate women messaged me thinking it was the same exact guy. Despite the women not knowing each other, they stated he is unstable and spends most days at this park. His cousin reported him too. I shared his name and photos with the rangers, and apparently the suspect is an old park ranger himself, so we shall see. The suspect apparently loves climbing trees and has a bunch of photos of himself 50 feet in the air, so he's probably up in the trees watching. Update 3: apparently he has a secret spot in these woods where has a chainsaw and gasoline. We reported it to the rangers. Pretty sure having a secret campground in a public park is illegal, with or without a chainsaw, and stalking/intimidation is a form of illegal assault, so there's no reason he can't at least be questioned. My aunt and uncle's house was in a small desert town. They had about 4 acres of land and a good amount of space between neighbors. On the back of their property there was a fenced-in area with a large shed and an old salvage U-Haul moving truck. I was visiting for a couple weeks one summer. My little cousin and I were about 10 and 12 at the time. One morning, we were roaming the property by ourselves. The adults were all out running errands. We ended up walking between the fence and the old moving truck. We were on the passenger side of the truck, walking from the back towards the front. All of a sudden, my cousin just froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood instantly. He didn't make a noise and just pointed at the side mirror. In the reflection, we could see a man sitting in the driver's seat. His face was caked in dirt and blood. He was moving around quickly, and at one point he ducked out of our view. We instantly turned and sprinted back to the house. We locked all the doors and called the cops and family. We were freaking out, running from room to room, looking out the windows, brandishing baseball bats. The police and family showed up after about 15 to 20 minutes. They searched all over, but never found the man. They found the fence was bent down where he must have climbed over it. There was blood and dirt smeared all over the driver's seat of the truck. He must have been trying to steal it because the ignition wires were pulled out like he was trying to hot wire it. No explanation for the blood. Nothing happened after that. My cousin and I had nightmares for the next few nights. That's about it. When I was a teenager, me and my friends used to quite frequently go to abandoned buildings of different sorts. This hobby kind of got worn out for me personally, but when I was at my first or second year of university, I noticed a weird, not too big, abandoned building very close to my university. My university is located pretty much downtown. The place we are talking about is very crowded and filled with elite property, stores, and historical buildings. So it was weird seeing the building standing weirdly in some sort of a yard between other buildings. So I grabbed my friends, there were 4 of us, and we decided to check it out. We came there late at night so there would not be more eyes than necessary. It also was winter. We grabbed our tools and broke a lock to one of the entrances, but it was a dead-end small room. It was pretty creepy with a wheelchair standing there. We then found another door to the building. It was locked more heavily. We could not break the lock itself, so we somehow managed to make a big hole in the door so everyone could just climb in there. It was very loud obviously, so after we've done it, we decided to wait a bit before going in just in case someone called the cops on us. After an hour spent at the nearby nearby McDonald's, we, proudly with how we handled that super locked door that seemed to haven't been open for years, decided to go in. The building felt empty and damaged. There was not much stuff there besides concrete walls and a lot of trash which we thought was old. There was no light in there at all. Every window was locked too. It's creepy to think back on this decision, but the first thing that we decided to do is to go to the attic, all of us. It was more of the same, a lot of trash, some graphitis, and generally nothing too interesting. Then we decided to come back to the floor we started from and check it out properly. While we were for some reason, I guess being kind of creeped out from the atmosphere, just standing in the corridor, which allowed to overview two big halls. Both of them were filled with trash. One of us decided to go across the hall. We could see him clearly with a flashlight to check out some sort of shack that was located in those piles of trash in the end of the hall. He looked inside and then rushed back to us very concerned. He said that there is a body inside. We all thought it was a dead person because the building was locked. No way someone was living there somehow. We felt like someone died and somehow nobody cared. This discussion could not be continued because we then actually saw someone coming at us, a mere silhouette. We lost our minds from this and we rushed into our door hole, which was not perfect for anyone to climb through it in such a rush. While we were making it out, this person shouted something angry at us with a rather unsettling voice and was mad at us for breaking the door. We were scared because of how unexpected that was. We were 100% sure there could not be anyone at a locked abandoned building that was out of use for years and partially damaged. We never thought to ourselves that maybe it was not the city that locked it, but someone managed to privatize the locks. The guy himself was creepy too, living in this absolutely dark, full of trash abandoned private hospital. Afterwards we tried to find what it was. It was the best guess. So my boyfriend and I went to Dave and Buster's for a date night the other day and everything was going well, until I passed by this woman closely standing next to a couple. At first I thought she was with them cause she was following them around. She looked like she was in her middle to late 20s. I saw her staring at me from afar, which was weird, but I shrugged it off since I'm Southeast Asian hanging out in a majority white and Hispanic populated area. Then my boyfriend and I walked past her and I felt her tap my arm. So I did what any normal person would do when someone taps their arm. I looked. When I turned my head to look at her, she didn't say anything and continued to stare with a blank look in her eyes. I paid it no mind. I have a pretty heavily tattooed arm, so I thought, you know, maybe she doesn't know social cues and just wanted to touch my tattoo. Yeah, that's it right. A few minutes later, we're still looking for another arcade game to play, and once again I see that same woman, but this time she's not with the couple and she's staring again. My boyfriend and I found a game to play, and as I focused on watching him do his turn, I felt a few quick taps on my arm once again. It was the same lady. This time I decided not to look despite how uneasy I felt, but I did see her pass by. My boyfriend finished his turn on the game and we started looking for another. As we walked around, I started analyzing the strange woman. She didn't have an arcade card and was walking around pretending to press buttons on machines ever so often. She did not go there with anyone. The couple she was by earlier was nowhere to be seen. The look in her eyes kind of reminded me of the people on some type of heavy drug in the downtown part of where I live. Had a creepy and stoic look on her face. As we headed to the ticket prize area, I was talking to my boyfriend about something and felt her tapping my arm again. This time I was fed up. I quietly told my boyfriend, who mind you is a pretty big and buff guy with 2 tattoo arm sleeves. My boyfriend asked me to point her out, so I looked around to find her and saw her staring again. I pointed right at her and my boyfriend was about to walk towards her and she hid behind the arcade machine. We left after that cause I felt pretty uncomfortable, especially since I'm already not about strangers touching me with no consent. Now that I've had time to process everything, I realize how creepy or strange that encounter was. I keep getting reminded of the blank look in her eyes and haven't been able to sleep properly cause of it. So I parked in the car park further away than the other cars this time at work. There was a man in a worky vest, a high visual vest with an old rusty pickup stick. I went shopping with my kids, then as I was walking to my car I had this strange feeling like I shouldn't have parked here because there aren't any people around. I get to my car and notice the man is still in the car park and I just thought maybe he's volunteering or something. He was a fair while away from me, definitely not close to me. I put my kids in the car, put my stuff in the boot, strap my son in the car, and then go to my daughter's side and buckle her in. I usually look around as I'm doing these things to make sure no one sneaks up on me, but I did it with my daughter because her seatbelt is harder to strap, so I was concentrating on that. I heard a car drive past and then people walking past talking, and that's when I stopped midway buckling my daughter in to look around, and that man was in front of my car about 2 to 3 meters away walking over and staring at me. I looked at him and then he put the stuff he had in his rusty pickup stick thing over a waist-high wall, and he also didn't have a bag with him to collect the stuff, and then he turned around and walked away. I'm wondering if those people didn't walk past, could have I been a victim, or is this reaching? If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I am not sure why I am writing or posting this, but I feel so shaken by this experience. I thought writing it out might be therapeutic. A few weeks ago, I was watching the news and one of the stories reported that a teacher from a prominent private school had just been convicted on multiple accounts of child assault, the victims including his children as well as students. The report of his arrest and allegations had been suppressed until the trial was over, however was now being made public. The reporter also referenced that the defense lawyers argued for a reduced sentence on the basis that the teacher had also been assaulted by his father when he was a child. When the name and photo of the teacher was shown, I almost choked. It was Cameron, who one of my best friends from primary school. I couldn't believe it. In primary school, I was best friends with two other boys, Cameron and Wilson. We finished primary school in 1995, and whilst they were both sent to the same high school, I was sent to a different school and we therefore lost touch after that. We would often sleep over at each other's houses, either the three of us or just two of us, and I started to recall memories I had completely forgotten, all involving Cameron's father. I really don't remember things clearly, but I remember different incidents at various sleepover nights at Cameron's house. Cameron and I would be changing into our pajamas before bed, and his father would come in and talk to us. I know it sounds warped, but I still remember thinking that he was doing this because he was treating us like grown-ups. I think this might have been because my family were extremely prudish with nudity, and I must have felt that nudity was an adult thing, and he was therefore treating us like grown-ups by having a normal conversation. I know it sounds foolish, but I was around 9 to 10 years old when this happened, and totally innocent. Remember, this was the mid-90s, and whilst we knew about stranger danger, we didn't consider friends' parents to be strangers, and no one ever talked about child assault. I also remembered times when Cameron and I would be taking a shower, one after the other, and he came into the bathroom to talk to us. I also clearly remembered that I saw his father naked once, and he entered the shower as I was leaving it. This is probably the clearest memory, because it was the first time I had seen a grown-up without any clothing on, and that his nakedness was fully visible and he was standing close to me. Only now, as an adult thinking back to that experience, did I realize he was putting himself quite deliberately on display. I just remember him just standing there openly before he entered the shower. I did have a vague memory that he asked Cameron and I to go downstairs, and that Cameron's mother and sister were entering the door downstairs. But as I said, none of these memories were very clear. I hadn't thought about any of this for years, and it dawned on me how innocent I was, and that I didn't realize that his behavior was totally inappropriate. Now that Cameron's lawyers said he was abused by his father, I started to feel sick and overwhelmed by anxiety as I tried to work out whether those experiences were linked, and if there were any more experiences that I perhaps couldn't recall. I really wanted to reach out to Wilson to see if he would be willing to discuss it. I hadn't spoken to him since we were 12, more than 25 years ago, but I fortunately found his profile on Facebook. I messaged him to let him know who I was and named the school and year we finished. Hey, this is Ryan, and we were best friends in primary school. I am not sure if you saw this link, but our other friend Cameron was just convicted of child assault. I know we haven't been in touch since we're kids, but I am hoping you would be open to having a chat with me. I am just remembering some things from my childhood involving Cameron's father. I left my mobile number and waited for his response. Wilson responded that same day, "Oh my god, I saw this story too and I am really glad you reached out. I have been feeling so sick about all of this, and this has opened up a lot for me too." Wilson said he would call that night. When he called, we ended up speaking for 2.5 hours. His memory was stronger than mine, but that's probably because the poor guy had more to remember. He said he was abused many times by Cameron's father during those same years. The sequence of events was almost identical to my memories. On the first nights when he slept over, Cameron's father started entering the room when the boys were changing before bed. He then started entering the bathroom whilst he was showering, and he eventually entered the shower, which is when the abuse started. He said that Cameron would often be there when it happened, but had no memory of me being there. This went on for a couple of years and ended in the first year of high school when he turned 13. It was around this age he actually started to become aware that what his father had done was wrong, and only then he felt uncomfortable about it. He stopped talking to Cameron around that time, and they fell out of touch. Wilson never reported it or told anyone, however entered into therapy for some time when he was an adult as he tried to process what he had experienced. I still don't know if I remember that date in the shower accurately, however if Cameron's mom had unexpectedly arrived home. That probably saved me from suffering the same abuse. I had no idea how close I came to experiencing things that could have completely turned my life around. It shocks me to remember my innocent child's mind having having no awareness that anything was wrong, and it would have been so easy to have taken advantage of that naivety. I am still wondering if I have suppressed anything more that might have happened, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, so I will book into therapy to try and work through it. I have changed names in this story, as Wilson still hasn't told anyone, and I don't want anyone reading to piece this together, but the entire experience has shaken me so much. I am glad that there is more awareness about abuse, and people are more open with their children, but please educate and protect your kids. I only now know how easy it is for people to take advantage of children. On my 19th birthday in September 2014, I'd moved into my first home, a small one-bed flat. I was beyond excited to have the freedom and independence that living alone would offer me, and quickly set about buying new furniture, decorations, and items for my home. One afternoon on the bus home after a trip into my local town to buy more household items, an elderly gentleman, in his late 60s if I had to guess, started speaking to me. I've always been a social person that'll gladly speak to whoever speaks to me, so I engaged him in the conversation. Just polite chit-chat about what we'd been up to that day, what our plans were for the rest of it. Upon reaching the stop I'd be getting off at, he told me he was also getting off at this stop as he was visiting a friend who lived in a neighboring block of flats. He offered to help me carry my shopping, and I agreed. I walked with him to the front of my block and said my goodbyes. He left towards a different block, and I thought that was that. He didn't enter my building or see which flat belonged to me, or so I thought. A few days later, I heard a knock upon my door. I opened it to find the same elderly gentleman standing outside my door. I was quite taken aback considering he should have known which flat I actually lived in. He'd also managed to get into the building without ringing my doorbell. The realization hit me that he was hidden out of sight to watch which flat I entered. Side note, the block had large windows in the communal area. He quickly forced his way into my home and tried talking to me. I lied and stated I was about to leave as my friends were expecting me, hoping this would encourage him to go. He then started groping me under my clothes and underwear. I moved his hands away, but he kept trying to remove my clothes. I ran to my front door and told him I'm leaving now, you need to go. Luckily he did, but loitered. I waited to make sure he'd walked away before walking in an opposite direction and immediately calling my dad in tears. We rang the police, who were as unhelpful as they could possibly be. 2 female officers who asked me why did he let him into the flat, despite me saying he'd forced his way in. They encouraged me to not press charges as the name and address he'd given me in our first exchange were falsified, telling me it would be difficult to prove, a lot of paperwork, and he'd have to relive it in court if we did manage to find him. I regretfully agreed. I was shocked and scared, and the police already were so unsupportive. It doesn't end there though. This man continued to stalk me for months, regularly appearing at my door, following me when I was out. It wasn't until he was on the same bus as me to town when I went to meet friends that it finally stopped, as this was the first time I was able to point him out to someone. My friends went over and publicly called him out for stalking and harassing me. They threatened him, saying if we ever hear of you doing this again, you'll not be able to use those arms to abuse another person again. Leave our friend alone. And he quickly scampered away, and that's the last I ever saw of him. But this incident shook me. It all happened simply because I was polite to a seemingly innocent elderly man who wanted to help me and make conversation. Needless to say, I've never accepted another offer of helping me carry my shopping. Be careful who you let help you. It might not be good intentions they have in mind. I just got back from a family vacation in Los Cabos, Mexico. We stayed at a nice Western resort, and usually around 9:30 at night, my family would head back to their rooms to go to sleep. Naturally, as a 25-year-old, I wanted to stay up and party or go drinking at bars, but my older brother was working remotely and wouldn't go out with me. After the family went to bed, I went out to a bar around the corner from my hotel and ended up befriending the locals there and a 29-year-old guy from San Diego named Luke, who was there for a wedding. We started hanging out every night after my family went to sleep, and on the 3rd night of the trip, Luke asked if I wanted to meet him in downtown Los Cabos with his friends. I really wanted to, but I was at an important dinner with the family that went on later than usual. I ended up staying home that night. The next night I met him at this huge mansion they rented on Airbnb, and he told me that it was good I couldn't make it out the night before because of how scary of an experience it was. He explained to me that the night before, his buddy was taking a piss outside and someone approached him and held out a key with a bump of coke on it. Without thinking, he snorted the bump, and the person who offered it was now demanding he buy an $80 bag from them. He was drunk and refused, while getting pretty aggressive towards them. Things went from bad to worse as the Mexican who offered the bump started following their group from bar to bar for the next 3 hours, taking pictures of them. He called his friends friends, and there were now a group of them following behind and claiming to be affiliated with the cartel. They warned that if Luke's buddy didn't pay them, they were going to call their boss. Luke eventually went over and tried to smooth things over. They told him his friend had stolen from them and it was going to cost him his life if someone didn't pay up. The cartel member also pulled his shirt up, revealing a 9mm pistol in his waistband. Luke did the right thing and remained calm while offering to take them to an ATM and pay out of pocket $160 so they could all be left alone. The cartel members gave him an empty coke bag and abruptly left. Even after him doing all this for his friend's safety, his friend denied any responsibility or wrongdoing and even had the audacity to blame Luke for trying to help by getting involved. He also didn't offer Luke a single dollar. After this event happened, Luke got robbed again in the same night, with a girl who ripped his $200 gold necklace right off his neck. His friend was cool to me but sounded like a real jerk after Luke explained this to me. Poor dude was just trying to be a good friend and was met with no gratitude, only to be robbed again. Needless to say, I am very happy I didn't make it out to meet them that night. I also think things could have gotten a lot worse for them had he not offered the cartel members money. Be careful out there and never accept quote-unquote free drugs from a stranger on the street in Mexico, or really anywhere. It always comes with a price. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Back in 2019, an 18-year-old girl, decided to download Tinder a few months after a rough breakup. I was very inexperienced with dating and pretty shy, so it seemed unlikely that I would meet a potential partner in person. Anyway, after a few matches that led to nothing, I came across the profile of someone that I found very attractive. He was 21 years old. We matched, exchanged snapshots, and continued to set up a date. Our first date was relatively normal/enjoyable. We saw a movie and by the end of it I felt like we hit it off. However, our relationship was extremely short-lived. Not long after I had agreed to be his girlfriend, after about a month of going out, he began to behave very erratically and would sometimes fall completely silent in the middle of conversation, ignoring me when I tried to ask him what was wrong. He became hot-tempered, slamming doors and speeding on the road when he was mad. I started to feel really uncomfortable about our relationship. This went on for about a few weeks until one night, when we were on our way to have dinner downtown, he fell silent mid-conversation. I became extremely anxious as he pulled into a nearby parking garage, wondering what I had done to upset him. As we parked, I decided to ask him what was wrong. He did not answer. When I asked him again, he shouted at me to shut up. I was completely frozen for a moment, but I finally got up the courage to tell him we were done, gather my belongings from the car, and walk over to the nearest coffee shop to call an Uber. It was fairly late at night, so I walked as fast as I could, hoping he wouldn't follow me. When I made it to the shop, I noticed I had several missed calls from him. When I made it home that night, I blocked him on all social media and decided to never contact him again. I'm fairly familiar with the dynamic of toxic relationships, and I knew that if he could talk to me that way, completely unprompted, it was likely that he was capable of much more. About a week goes by as I start to settle my emotions a bit. I decide to confide in a friend who had never met the guy about what happened, feeling completely embarrassed. A few nights later, I received a text from the same friend. It was a screenshot of an Instagram message from someone she didn't follow, my now ex. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm sorry we're having to meet like this, but my name here is ignoring me and I need to talk to her." My heart sunk. I decided to message all of my friends separately and let them know what happened, just in case. Later that week, I started receiving several messages from various accounts, all without profile pictures or posts. Eventually, I gave in and responded to one, asserting that the relationship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him again. I blocked the accounts immediately afterwards. As time went on without hearing a word in weeks, I figured I had reached the end of the situation. Until, one morning while I walked to my car, I noticed something dangling around the handle of my car door. It was a necklace I gave him. He had only picked me up once from my house before. The thought of him driving to my house, about a half hour from his place, earlier that night freaked me out. I was shaken up for a while. It was by no means an expensive necklace, and I had the exact same one, but I kept it pushing. I thought maybe it was his way of acknowledging that we were done. 2 months later, I was working my job at a small boutique near my house. I was used to answering the phone several times a day, so when the phone rang I thought nothing of it, but when I picked up I immediately recognized his voice. He started rambling about wanting a sweatshirt back, but I hung up before he could finish. That was the last time I would ever tell someone I was dating where I worked. I was completely losing it at this point, especially considering he had never called me at work while we were together. I didn't even know how he knew that I was working that day and or time. I told my older sister the situation and she, being very protective, decided to message him herself. She told him to leave me alone and even offered to give him back the sweatshirt for me. He refused and insisted on meeting meeting up with me in person to get it. When it became abundantly clear that he didn't actually want the sweatshirt back, she threatened him with a private protection order, to which he never responded. That was the last time I heard from him. We moved into a suburban house in the southern United States a few years back. When the pandemic hit, I found myself working remotely. It was great since I spent more time with my family and didn't have to spend 2 hours in traffic. However, being home a majority of my week exposed me and my family to a variety of strange encounters that have only escalated through the years. Early in the pandemic, we got a knock on the door in the middle of the morning. I was in a meeting, but I heard my partner open the door. I could tell by the voice it was our next door neighbor, an older woman who lived alone. She was in the process of moving and had stopped by every day or so to give us a few odds and ends that she didn't want to take with her. However, within seconds my partner called my name with a worried tone. I excused myself from the meeting and head over to our landing, which is open to the front door below. Both my partner and the neighbor look slightly panicked. One of our neighbors says there's a strange man sitting on our back wall. What do we do? For context, my house is on a green belt. There's about 500 yards of woods and field until you hit a 4-lane road and small shopping plaza. Our back wall is a smooth concrete and around 6.5 feet high. The ground on the green belt side is sloped, which ends up making the wall about 7 feet high on the green belt side. A taller person with considerable effort could probably scale it. I initially think there's no way someone is up on the wall right now, but sure enough, as I run downstairs and look through the back sliding glass door, there's a middle-aged man smoking a cigarette with both feet hanging into my yard. He's kind of lazily staring at the back of mine and my neighbor's houses. My adrenaline starts to kick in. My kid's swing set and toys are in the backyard. I hate confrontation, but I seem to be automatically moving to open the back door. My partner asks what I'm doing. I open the door and step out onto the porch and start walking across the yard. As I get closer, I can tell the guy is bugging and probably homeless. He notices me when I get about 6 feet from him. I'm trying to stay calm and not escalate. Hey man, what are you doing up here? He gestures around him, enjoying the view. I interrupt. Yeah, you gotta get down and go somewhere else. He just kind of stares at me and swings a leg over the other side but stays put. Please get off my property, I say more forcefully this time, trying to hide any wavering in my voice. Yeah, okay, he slides the other leg around and jumps down, disappearing from view. Never saw this person again. Thankfully, a few months later, I'm working from home. My partner and kid are gone, so I'm alone. There's a knock at the door. Usually, I ignore them unless I'm expecting someone. Most of the time, it's either Amazon or a solicitor. They usually knock once and then take off. However, this person leans on the doorbell and knocks again. Annoyed, I leave the office to go see who it is. I make my way to the door and can hear a muffled conversation taking place on the other end. Before I can look through the peephole, I look and see 4 people all dressed like they're heading to a business lunch, 2 men in their middle 20s, an older man, and a young woman towards the back that couldn't have been more than 20 or 21 years old. I slowly open the door out of curiosity, and the older man immediately gets uncomfortably close and starts speaking forcefully in a language I don't understand. It takes my brain a moment to catch up. I can't understand you, I start to say. He pauses and asks in English, you can't speak Russian, though. Then there's a long moment where we all kind of stare at each other. He looks like he doesn't believe me. Flurried, where is the nearest Russian church? He asks, while the others stand silently behind him. I have no clue. I genuinely have no idea if such things exist in the southern United States. He thanks me and then they all walk back to their nondescript sedan and take off. They did not stop at any other houses on the street. I, a 26-year-old woman, live in a flat building in a good area. It's a long, windy cul-de-sac, so there's not many cars coming in and out unless it's people leaving or coming home from work. My boyfriend is away to Thailand for a month and we usually take the dog out together at night. I went myself, which I was fine with. I usually feel safe. Last week, at around 8 at night, I left the flat to take my dog for a pee. My dog is extremely excitable, especially around other people. She just had her space surgery. She has a cone on her head and stitches that have to heal. I'm waiting for my dog to do her business, and a car pulls in and drives slowly past me. The guy did a friendly neighborly nod towards me, so I did a small smile back, you know, to be polite. The guy parks at the front of the building, and I'm at the other side of the car park on the grass with my dog. I'm watching my dog, trying to get her to hurry up because it was freezing. I look up, and the man has stood outside his car staring at me. Freaked out by this, I turn my attention back to my dog. I keep looking over my shoulder, and he's staring with a creepy smile on his face. I looked away again for a second, and he was was walking along the road slowly towards us. I'm a really friendly person. I can be paranoid and aware, as any woman should be at night, but something about him made me feel scared. He's walking so slow, as if he wants to talk to me, so I hide behind a van, and I'm telling my dog hurry up and pee. I can't see him anymore, which terrified the life out of me. All I hear are footsteps coming towards us. The guy peeks his face around the van, and my dog goes nuts. She's jumping around, barking aggressively, which she never does with people, and the guy doesn't take that as a reason to leave. My dog is showing that he doesn't want his presence, but even though she's doing this, he continues walking towards us slowly. I start backing up and say to him to please leave as she's just had surgery, and she's too excited. In the most quiet, sinister voice he asks what's your name. I couldn't really hear him. He kept repeating the question. I eventually understood what he was asking. My dog is still going absolutely nuts at him. I say again, please, my dog's just had surgery. You need to walk away, she's too excited. Ignored again. Walks towards us, asking my name, so I start walking away from him. He ponders for a minute, still smiling, creepily may I add. He eventually backs up slowly, still facing me. I swear he did this for at least 20 seconds. He walks back to his car, looking over his shoulder at me, then stands back at his car and stares for another 3 minutes. I pretend my dog is doing something, which she's really just being a pain in the butt and just standing there. I look up and he's gone. I'm shaking and sending my sister voice notes about what's going on. She's telling me just go inside, but she doesn't realize I'm frozen in fear. Eventually, I see a woman and her son rock up to the front door, so I half jog over with my dog to go inside the same time as them. The front of our building has glass doors. I glance in and the man is standing there, waiting for us. I told the woman this man has been following me and my dog. I'm scared and she walks in with me. The man sees I'm not alone and walks right past us out of the building again. I run into the lift with my dog, get in and lock my doors. I decide to tell my 2 guy neighbors about it, as my boyfriend is away and they agree to run downstairs if I ever need them. I took a picture of his car and registration plate, as my twin sister gets the train home late at night after work and I want her to be wary of him. Well, today I was out with my dog at 11 in the morning, just doing our usual walk around the block. We walk into the building and as we are heading to the lift, I see the guy peek his head around the corner. He was looking for me. He started walking towards me. At first I didn't recognize him, but then he smiled his creepy smile and I realized who it was. He said hello, so I said hi then beeline for the lift. He came towards me and my dog again. I pressed the lift button just watching it come down from the 6th floor. He comes and stands closer to me again. My dog is going nuts at him. He asked what my name was. He has an accent. He asked again when I didn't understand what he was saying. I asked what my dog's name or mine. He goes yours. I froze and said a fake name. He started to move closer. I had no time to pay attention. The lift was about to open and I could run away. He told me his name. I replied nice to meet you and finally the lift doors opened. I walked in and pressed the button to my floor hoping he'd leave me alone. He ran behind me as I walked in and when I'd like to see you again. Shivers ran down my spine. I was so creeped out. I replied that I had a boyfriend, but thanks. As I said this, the lift doors were closing and he tried to stick his hand out to stop the lift from closing. Thank goodness they closed on time. I'm only on the next floor up, so I was so afraid he was going to run up as he could see what floor I got off at. I stopped for a moment and almost pressed a different floor, but I just wanted to get into my home and lock the doors. The lift opens and he's not there, so I beeline to my front door. There's a glass door to the stairs, and I swear I thought I saw someone coming up. I ran in and locked the front door. I was so confused by what just happened. Next thing I do, message everyone with the update. They told me to phone the non-emergency police number, even just to get it on record, so I did that, and the police arrived at my flat at 3 in the afternoon. I explained everything to them, and they said I could either 1, get the police to go to his front door and tell him to knock it off, or 2, next time he does something like that, tell him to leave me alone, and if he doesn't, phone the police as it would then be considered harassment. But for now, the police couldn't do more, which is fair enough. I didn't want to anger him at this stage, as it's not a crime at this point, but why can't he just leave me alone? I've clearly shown that I'm not interested. I hate saying something's going on when it maybe isn't, but I just have a terrible gut feeling. I hadn't seen the guy since the last incident, however I saw him today. I again was taking my dog out to the toilet around 1 in the afternoon. As soon as I left the main door, I look and the guy is sitting in his car. He clocked me. I started walking past his car when he got out and said hello to me. I completely ignored him and walked on by. I was preparing myself to shout at him if he kept following or talking to me. I went over to the grass and the guy is standing at his car staring. Again, I'm a bit further away, so I text my sister letting her know that he was at his car watching me. She didn't reply, so I phoned one of my guy neighbors and he quickly got his shoes on and said he was coming down the stairs. I look back at the man and it seems as though he has his phone out, recording me. I started shaking, working myself up to the point of confronting him and telling him to leave me alone. Next thing I know, my sister bolts out of the building building and fast walks over to me and my dog. She said as soon as she came out of the building, she saw him back inside his car with the car door fully open and his back was turned to her because he was watching me. So she saw at this time, he looked at her briefly and watched her walk over to me. He started staring at us both. That's when my guy neighbor got outside and walked over to us. The man continued watching as I told them both I think he was waiting for me to go back into the building because why was he just sitting there? My sister had enough of it, so she told me and my neighbor to take the dog for her walk and stormed over to the guy's car. She said excuse me and he was shocked. She stood right in front of his car and explained that he needs to leave me alone. I'm not interested. I told him the dog had surgery and he wouldn't leave, which is unacceptable. She also said that I had mentioned about my boyfriend, so he needs to leave me alone. He just nodded and mumbled a few times. She said he looked frightened. She walked back into the building, so we took the dog a walk and when we got back, he was gone. Probably got out of his car and ran back into his flat. I mean, he made me uncomfortable, so she did it to him. Now, if anything else happens, I'm phoning the police as they would then say it's harassment. When I was in my early 20s, me and some friends went out to celebrate my birthday. We went to a couple parties since it was the weekend, then bar hopped the rest of the night. While we were at a bar, we met a group of guys that offered to buy us drinks. It was my birthday, so this sounded nice. We danced around with them for a bit before retreating back to our little section. One of the guys come over to our section and asked me to dance again. I told him maybe in a bit and went back to partying with my girl. We didn't see them again until the club closed. The group of guys came over to us, and of course we're trying to find someone to go home with. The same guy that approached me earlier had approached me again. I laughed it off and thanked him for a good time. By this time, we all were getting in the car. We had a designated driver and they made sure each of us got home safe after the club. 3 nights later, me and my then boyfriend were knocked out as I had work the next morning. My boyfriend worked nights, but he was off this night. This was at 3:41 in the morning. There's a knock at the door. My boyfriend goes to answer it and I'm walking behind him, wondering who could possibly be at the door at that time of night. We lived in a not so good area, so the porch lights would work when they wanted to, and now wasn't one of those times. As my boyfriend opens the door, the person at the door says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I can't get my car to start," and as he looks up, I immediately recognize him from the man at the club. I scream and my boyfriend catches on and closes the door. Lee and him had a few laughs when I told him about the guy at the club, so when I told him that was him, he opened the door back, I guess to confront him, but he was gone. We hadn't seen a car, but again, it was dark. I don't know how this man found where I live, other than following us home that night. I still get the chills thinking what may have happened if my boyfriend wasn't there that night. On Sunday, which was the 27th of November, at 19:45 I left a hotel in Krakow, Poland with my boyfriend to go to Kojo Mojo restaurant via Bolt. However, just prior to this I had a drink at the hotel bar and within 15 minutes of drinking some of it, I commented how drunk I already felt from it. Upon arriving to Kojo Mojo restaurant in Krakow, we proceeded to have dinner and some wine. This is when I blacked out and the rest of the night is a blur. We apparently left the restaurant shortly after and went to a bar which was a walking distance from the restaurant. Apparently upon arriving I looked like I was super drunk and had no hand or eye coordination, couldn't talk, and also proceeded to fall off the bar stool backwards. At this point my boyfriend tried his best to take me out of the restaurant, and whilst walking to the taxi, I fell over again completely into a pile of bikes. I couldn't even stand up by myself. Upon arriving back to our hotel by taxi, he got out first, and before I could get out, the taxi drove off with me still in. At this point I still do not remember anything at all. My boyfriend straight away called the police and tried calling me and I didn't answer, and he tracked my location to a car rental company. Finally, after about an hour, a woman picked up my phone pretending to be me. This was when my boyfriend called the police again to chase them, who came to the hotel to investigate. I only have 3 glimpses of memories for the window of 5 hours which I was missing for. 1. Being told to hide in the backseat footwell. 2. Being in a house which is still in the middle of construction which did not look like it was in a city with other young women who had IVs attached. 3. Being on a motorway crying and pleading them that I have to get back to the hotel to get my passport as I have a flight back to London. I somehow, and don't know how, managed to get back to the hotel after loads of crying and pleading and negotiation as they dropped me off at my hotel to get my passport. I ran straight to reception and did not go back out again. From this point I slowly started becoming more conscious of my surroundings, but it's still quite foggy. Shortly after returning to my hotel room, the police were informed that I had returned and started their investigation and looking at the camera footage which confirms my story. I then shortly realized that I was wearing a polo from the car rental company which was located in the same location as my phone for the rest of the night. However, every single time someone would pick up my mobile, it would be a different woman of Albanian descent, and they said that they found my phone on the street, which doesn't make sense. Weirdly enough, my boyfriend got a phone call from a different police station the following morning saying my phone was handed in. I have the taxi driver's photo, registration plate, name and phone number, which was also passed over to the police in Poland. However, they haven't been able to help in any way. For context, I didn't grow up in a good area. I won't give location for privacy, but I live in a fairly large city. At the time I was around 10 or 11. This was overall not a good area. Lots of gang activity, drug use, that kind of thing. One of those neighborhoods with the jacked up sidewalks and shopping carts strewn everywhere. There was a park a couple blocks away from my house and I decided to go on a run and spend some time there on my own. I don't know why I was allowed to leave on my own, knowing the area. It was still light out when I jogged down there, but it started getting dark when I actually reached the park. It was around dusk. The layout of the park was a big rectangle basically. It faced out long ways, so the shorter side was where the gate was. It's hard to explain, so I'll try to attach a picture to show you people what it looked like. There was a set of swings at the very front and I sat down to hang out there for a bit. At the time I didn't have a phone with service, I just had music downloaded to listen to. I was sitting with my earbuds in and just got this really awful feeling. It felt like a tingling on my back and I knew something was up. I took one earbud out and kept swinging, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Finally, I turned around to check behind me. There was an alleyway leading into the park that curved so you could only see part of the way down. It was all white gravel. Down the alley was a dumpster. There was a figure on the ground with a ton of red stuff around him, which I now know was blood, and another guy standing walking towards me fast. The alley was across the playground, about 40 feet away maybe. As soon as I saw the man approaching me, I dipped out of there. He had something in his hand that I couldn't see, but he was holding it like a knife or a pair of scissors. I sprinted the couple blocks back to my house and got into the bag to make sure no one saw me. I didn't tell my dad until years later, and he fully believed me. That area was bad news, and I'm amazed something bad didn't happen to me with how much I was let out alone. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So, about 9 years ago, my boyfriend, now husband who is 44 years old, and I, a 40-year-old woman, were driving cross-country from California to Florida. My husband had an enormous Rottweiler named Kuma. It means bear in Japanese, and it fit. He was 110 pounds. I had only just met Kuma maybe 2 days prior, since my hubby and I were in a long-distance relationship at the time. So Kuma and I, didn't know each other well yet. But he was a great boy and talked a lot. We called them Umbo Crumbles. We stopped at a gas station so that we could all get out, stretch, and use the restrooms. He got Kuma on his leash and said he'd take him for a walk. I offered to do it instead since I didn't need to use the restroom urgently. Now, I'm not a small girl, I'm 5'10", but I am 125 pounds. My husband is almost 6'5" and built like a Viking, so a dog Kuma's size wouldn't affect him one way or another if he tried to bolt chasing a squirrel or something. I, on the other hand, will admit I was nervous once he handed me the leash to hold him because if he decided to try anything, I wasn't big or strong enough to stop him. My husband noticed my nervousness. He just smiled and said, "Don't worry, he's well trained. He won't take off, and he won't let anything happen to you." It's important to note that Kuma had no formal protection training, and he just loved whatever his dad did and knew he was supposed to protect and keep it safe when dad wasn't there to do it himself. Once he was sure I was comfortable, my husband headed inside, leaving Kuma and I near the far right side of the gas station, with a little dirt path near a wooded area. It was very dark, and there was little light being shed so far from the building, but it was a busy little station, and I could see people so I didn't feel isolated or anything. So I start to walk slowly, allowing Kuma to take in his surroundings when I hear a noise coming from behind me. I turn startled to see a man walking. He notices me and slows his gait, looks around, back at me, then smiles eerily. He changes direction suddenly, heading directly towards me. He says it's awful dangerous out here alone. Are you alone? Something in his eyes told me to run. Just as I'm about to bolt and start hustling towards the people and lights of the station, I hear another sound. This one is new to me me. As I clutched my hand, preparing to run or die fighting off this creepy guy, I felt something. Polish, Kuba. In that moment, I'd forgotten that I wasn't alone at all. Not by a long shot. The sound I had heard was a warning, a very lethal one. It was the deepest, most menacing growl I have ever heard come out of anything. That beautiful beast stepped out from behind me, where he'd been observing the threat like a giant dragon rising from the shadows. The man's creepy smile slipped right off his face, as did a few shades of color. Puma placed his large body between mine and the approaching strangers and pressed back against me, urging me towards the jeep. He didn't have to tell me twice. I turned and started to make my way back to the car, still holding that leash for dear life. He walked backward, pressed against me the whole time, watching my back until we made it back to where we had parked. I tried to look for the man, but he either ran back to wherever he'd come from or made it inside, taking a much longer route. Well outside Kuma's reach, I told my husband what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure who would have done more damage to that unfortunate man had they located him. Every day for the next 9 years, Kuma was my best friend and guardian. Rest in peace, Kuma. I, a 20-year-old woman, work part-time at a small business in my local mall and usually work alone. I am a sales associate, so I am required to talk to customers and encourage them to buy things. It was the last hour of my shift when a creepy man came in. He was about in his middle 40s and everything about him was odd. His clothes didn't fit, expensive shoes, socially awkward. He originally asked a pretty standard question about a less expensive item that I happily answered. After this though, he continued to ask questions almost as if he wanted to keep my attention to him. He then asked if he could try out our most expensive item in the store, which is a massage chair, and I say yes. We let everyone try it out. At this point, I just thought he was an innocent yet socially awkward guy. He gets in the chair to try it out and continues to ask unusual questions. We chit-chat a bit, and I tell him the massage chair's features and the price of it. All of a sudden, the questions get more personal. He asked what high school I went to and if I missed it. Me being naive, I said the high school I went to and that I did not miss going. He said some story about a teacher I've never heard of and said he missed high school a lot. He asked if I lived around there, to which I avoided the question but implied that I lived close. He then repeatedly asked me the price of the chair and asked me to calculate the price along with our second most expensive item in the store. I thought he was fully interested and I was convinced he was about to buy it. We made commission on the chair, so I ignored his creepiness because I wanted to make the sale. He kept insisting that he needed to walk out with the chair today and he has a truck that is big enough to hold it. It seemed I had finally answered his questions to his liking because I was able to walk away a bit. He then made a phone call and started describing how I look, my age, where I live approximately, and what store I worked at. He then said to the person on the phone, we got one. I had suspicions that he was creepy, but this confirmed it. I asked him from behind the cashier's counter, you're not talking about me, right? He shook his head no. He then stood up from the chair and said he will not be buying the chair today. I was so scared and alone, no one else around but me. I ran to the back and grabbed all my stuff and pulled out my pocket knife. He then left the store and hung out right outside the only entrance/exit. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay inside the mall. I waited for him to go out of sight and then quickly locked the store doors and ran outside to my car. I called my manager and she said I have to close the store properly, turn off lights, count register. So she told me to go into a nearby store in the mall and call a security escort. I did that, was escorted back to the store to close up, and was escorted back to my car with no further incident. I live in a city with one of the highest rates of human trafficking in the country. Was I being targeted by a human trafficker? My mom decided to tell my dad, my brother, and me an incredibly secret one-word code that would only be used to verify that we are who we say we are in case of a dangerous situation, or something like that. It's a pretty unique word. If you can even call it that, it's almost inconceivable to be mentioned in regular conversation. We all thought it was pretty corny, but we all agreed to remember it, and all of us talk about the code in conversation every once in a while. Note that my mom came up with this code several years after we had moved away to a different state, California, from our hometown, Illinois. Fast forward to last week. A tradition of our family is to go back to our hometown for Thanksgiving every year, and my dad's and uncle's birthday is within that week, so we usually celebrate their birthday during this week as well. We decided, since it was my father's 50th birthday, that we'd go to a dive bar with my family and my parents' high school friends. Vibes were great, and it was the first time our whole family had been out together for several years. About an hour in, a late 60s to early 70s man wearing a bar staff shirt came up to me, my brother and my mom, and said this incredibly secret aforementioned family code. The way he said it was so deliberate, it was like he knew how much the code meant to my family. We all looked at each other with very perplexing gazes, like we all wanted to say something to each other, but as soon as we looked at each other, he went over to where he was sitting prior to this incident. My brother went over to talk to him a few minutes later, but I forget what he had said to him. Nothing noteworthy as far as I know. Later that night, he and my dad were outside smoking and gave my dad a rock. It was a dark brown rock with dark orange streaks passing through the rock. I think my dad gave it to my mom, and my mom threw it away. My mom believed that the rock was some sort of bad omen. This really did happen. My brother and I think it's a clever prank that my mom has pulled, but she usually cracks when this happens and we ask her a few times. I wouldn't think she would have joked about this in the first place, but it's the only logical thing that we could possibly come up with. Even the day following, my brother and I asked my mom about this incident again and she remained very adamant about her having no involvement in this. My dad isn't the prank pulling kind of guy and wasn't even there to see it go down. No negative connotation, but it's just not in his nature to ask a stranger to do something like that, so it eliminates him from doing something like this. We asked him anyway, and to no surprise, he said he had no involvement. It's a creepy interaction we'll likely never forget. We haven't lived there for roughly 20 years, and the only family member living there is my grandmother, who is in her 80s and I don't think even knows how to get the phone number of said bar. As mentioned previously, some of my parents' high school friends still live here. However, it was an on-the-fly decision to go to this dive bar we art frequents, and it's located in a medium-sized city, about 150,000 people. Nobody had posted its whereabouts on socials until later that night or afterwards. This goes back to when I was about 12. We lived in a really bad neighborhood at the time. It was me, my little sister, and our parents. This was the kind of neighborhood you lived in when you had literally no other option. It was a miserable existence. I was often tasked with watching my little sister, who is 3 years younger than me. I also hated this, and I had gone to play with some neighborhood kids and ended up staying out later than we were supposed to. I remember trying to rush my sister because I was afraid I would get in trouble. I don't know why this one specific part sits in my head still and makes me sad to think about, but I remember pulling her arm really hard because she wasn't keeping up. On our way home, we ran into these two older guys from our neighborhood. They were somewhere in the range of late teenagers to early 20s. Literally everybody in our neighborhood hated these two. They were always starting fights, playing their music too loud, and driving way too fast. Just the kind of people that you wouldn't want to hang around. As I'm pulling my little sister, one of them charges at me and picks me up. 12-year-old me wasn't having any of that, so I was fighting him, but eventually he just took me and physically threw me in his backyard. I don't remember how the other bit happened, but the other one grabbed my sister and followed us. This would make sense to me later, but I noticed that their behavior was much more erratic than usual. For instance, one of them would periodically grab me by the head and squeeze it around my ears. This terrified me because I thought they were going to kill us. I was crying, but my sister oddly enough held it together. I also recall they would randomly just scream things at us. Nothing about them was making any sort of sense. This went on for almost an hour. Then a cop car passed and I remember screaming for help. He didn't hear me, but the two guys ended up letting us go. We ran home and told our parents. My dad would go and talk to these two, but he didn't do anything about it. I was told many years later by my mom, long after we had actually moved away from there and into a good neighborhood, that on that night in question, one of our neighbors had brutally killed his wife and mother. Had we kept running, we would have been in the midst of that. These two guys pretty much abducted us for the sake of protecting us, as weird as that sounds. From what I could piece together, they would scream at us and cover our ears to prevent us from having to hear what was going on. Could have gone about it a lot better, but what's done is done. I'm writing this out because I actually ran into one of those older boys recently. He's actually a cop now and has been on the force for about 10 years. He is very decorated and seems to be making an effort to keeping the streets safe. It was a creepy and scary encounter, but I'm glad that there are people that still want to do some level of good. A little context for this one, just so you know, this ended up being longer than I expected. I, a 32-year-old woman, usually get around town in my own car, but I've used Uber on multiple occasions. This is not Uber bashing, by the way. Most times it is a safe and reliable service, which is why I use it. And I try not to be paranoid despite the stories of women that have gone missing this way. Anyway, this means that every woman I know has thought about what they would do if they found themselves in this situation. Stuff like being on the phone with someone the whole ride, not falling asleep no matter how tired or drunk you are, sharing your location through another app, assessing whether jumping out of a moving car is worth the risk, and even carrying weapons. I carry a pocket knife and I learned to use it. Survivors have told stories of their driver going quiet, turning off the app, and changing routes to streets they don't recognize. They try to pass it off as taking shortcuts. That being said, one day after work I had to take a taxi home, and I scheduled an Uber as usual. The car rolled up, the make and model matched, the plates matched, and the driver looked like the photo. So far so good. I climbed climbed inside the car, greeted the driver, and immediately shared my live location with my hubby, letting him know I was on the way. As an extra precaution, I always check that the locks could be disengaged by hand, and bonus points to cars with windows that could be cranked down manually. The drive started normal. Driver was an older guy, friendly. We struck up a conversation, small talk. We found a lot of traffic and the driver asked if I wanted to take an alternate route. I pointed at an access road that I normally use to skip traffic, and he switched lanes. We were going down the access road, and this is when things started getting sketchy. He said that he made a wrong turn, and we kept driving farther and farther away from the main road, supposedly looking for a way to get back on track. The app was still running as normal, and the GPS was telling him how to get back on the main road, but he kept ignoring it, saying that we were not too far away anyway and that he knew another way to get to my destination faster. So this is when alarms start going off in my head, especially because we kept getting closer to a bad part of town. True, if you cross those neighborhoods you could find another main road on the other side, but most people avoid it for it being the aforementioned bad part of town. Like, police don't even patrol those streets sometimes. As he drives deeper into the neighborhood, he notices I'm tensing up. Truth is, I was debating whether I should reach for my knife or if I was being super paranoid, and the driver was honestly just trying to get to the other main road. So he starts telling me about the neighborhood and that I shouldn't be scared, that it was dangerous, but that good people live there. Honestly, I wasn't so worried about the people living in the neighborhood as I was about this guy taking the scenic route. So I started talking too about how I was aware there was a road that crossed to the other side and that I knew exactly where I was. The conversation at some point turned to his daughter, who was college aged, and I kept making as many parallels as I could between that girl and myself. Hand on my pocket knife by this point, the other hand ready to unbuckle the seatbelt, while I kept an eye on the map to make sure we were getting closer to the other main road, and thankfully we were. I did not begin to relax until I started recognizing where we were. We did eventually make it to my own neighborhood, and I made him stop a block before reaching my house. Didn't want the guy to know where I actually lived, and I skipped out of there as fast as I could. I really hope I was just being paranoid and that I was never actually in any danger, but all I have to say is that was an intense ride. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Just for context, for my job I'm on call 24/7 and my company is only required to give me a 2-hour heads up before coming into work. I usually leave my apartment 20 to 30 minutes before I have to be at work. I typically get called to work between 9 at night and 4 in the morning though. One Tuesday morning I had to be at work by 2 in the morning. I am ahead of schedule getting ready and I see that my wife, let's call her Jan, places the trash near the door for me to take out. It is about 1 in the morning when I decide to take the trash out. Now usually when I go to work at that time during the week I'm the only one out and about in my apartment complex. When I leave my building and head to the dumpster, which is about 100 feet from my door, I hear a car running. I can be a bit paranoid and always like to know what is going on around me, so as I walk to the dumpster and I try to figure out what car. It was then I realize it is a car that is parked right next to the dumpster and right next to my car. All of their lights were off, so no one could tell outside of the sound that it was that particular car. Because of that, my gut was telling me something isn't right, so I throw the trash away and head back inside to finish getting ready. About 30 minutes later, I go to leave and the car that was running still is and still parked right next to my car. As I go to get into my car, I notice there's someone in the front passenger seat closest to my door. However, due to the dark window tint on the other car, I could not see any details of the person. So I quickly throw my bags in my car and head to work. I usually mess with music before pulling out, but my gut told me forget the music and get out of there as soon as possible. After I get to work, 20 minutes after I left, I see a text from Jan that says our dog woke her up to go to the bathroom. The timestamp is from about 5 minutes after I left. I immediately tell her to take the dog out back, which is a bit more private and not in the designated spot out front because she would have to walk by the car that was running with someone in it and the designated spot isn't well lit. Jay responds about 5 minutes later and tells me she forgot her phone. She then tells me that when she took the dog out in the designated area, she too noticed the car running and she too got a weird gut feeling. Remember, Jan had no clue about my feeling until after this happened to her. Jan said that after she took the dog to the designated spot, the car that was running moved from the previous spot, where the dumpster blocked their view of her, to a spot where they could easily see her. She then noticed a man in a dark colored hoodie walking towards her from the general area where the car's new spot is. Now this is a fairly warm time and once again 1 to 2 in the morning on a Tuesday morning, so very odd. She said the man simply walked by her, but he too gave her a strange feeling. She feels that somehow they are connected given the fact that they both occurred so close together. A few weeks later, we found out from our apartment complex that there had been car break-ins recently. We couldn't help but wonder if that car or the man had anything to do with it. This happened to me in the summer of 2019 when I was a 19-year-old woman and working at a dollar store as a summer job between semesters at university. A guy came into the shop around closing, 9 at night, probably in his late 20s to early 30s, and was obviously high. He had the red eyes, slurred speech, everything. Anyways, I said my normal fake hi and smile. Any retail employee knows what I'm talking about, and just let him into the store. He grabbed a cart and started piling stuff into it, only 20 minutes later to come up to my station saying his weed had worn off and he no longer wanted the pile of stuff in the cart. At this point I was super pissed because that meant I had to put it all back. He paid for a few things, thanking me for being so chill about the fact that he was high, then basically started telling me his whole life story about how his wife left him and took his 3 kids with her, that he was broke, all that stuff. He started asking me what my name was, where I lived. Obviously I lied. He said he would be back and walked out. I thought nothing of it. I noticed that he started coming in a lot more often with his backpack, and he always made eye contact with me, coming up to my station to pay for a bottle of water or something. He kept asking me questions about myself, and I was pretty discreet. I suspected that he was stealing. To be honest, I didn't really care, but he always gave me that look as if I was his accomplice or something. Then it started getting super weird. I didn't tell my boss about him. Granted, I probably should have, but I didn't want to accuse someone of stealing because of their financial status or whatever else might be going on. I didn't want to accuse him in case he was innocent and I was just misunderstanding things. I think she knew something was up though because of how uncomfortable I was whenever he came in, asking if someone could cover me on my station or asking for an early break, stuff like that. I wasn't actually at work for this part, but my boss told me about it later. She said he came into the store in tears, admitting that he had been stealing from the store the last couple of weeks. He told her he had made a list of things he stole and was going to pay it all back. This is where I reminded it was a dollar store. It's not like he snagged the Mona Lisa. I was stocking shelves when I saw him next. He came up the aisle and snuck up behind me, startling me. He insisted he wasn't there to steal, then professed his love to me, insisting that I call him. I didn't even have his number, not that I would have if I did. I wasn't at my station when he went up to pay for a handful of chocolate bars, but my boss was, and she told me he pulled out a wad of bills to pay for them. She asked him where he got the money and he quote responded, "I found a pot of gold." She thought he was joking, so she asked him with amusement where he found it and he quote responded, "I found it next to a dead leprechaun." To say she was freaked out was an understatement. And she told me that if he came back to call her immediately. A week later was when I saw him next, annoyed at the sound of a car in the parking lot. I turned, looking out the window behind my station to see a car. It looked like an expensive blue sports car, maybe like a Lamborghini or something, I'm not sure, but it was definitely expensive. It was racing through the parking lot very loudly and stopped right in front of the store. I watched him get out and my eyes widened in shock. He was in an expensive black suit, hair gelled back. He looked like he just came out of a board meeting. So he comes into the store, and before I could even call my boss over the speaker, he was up at my station, leaning towards me and saying, "So, when are you gonna call me?" in like this flirty/seductive way. I don't remember what I said, probably made up some excuse. I transferred stores to another city for school not long after, so I never saw him again, but I still remember his face that last time when he looked at me like a piece of meat instead of a person. I also questioned what he meant when he said a dead leprechaun. My friends think he won the lottery. My mother thinks that he got an inheritance from a dead relative, but I'm not sure. I'll try and keep this story as short as I can, but so much of what makes it creepy is in the details and atmosphere surrounding my experience. My mother and myself decided to visit Nevada City on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining/logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures on Google if you really want to see a creepy town. It looks haunted without having to try. After eating lunch at a brew pub, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. This cemetery was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are, because of the high mortality rate of the time, and lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper cemetery with large, ornate tombs/mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots, stuff like that. What's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. As we follow the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it becomes hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents and bags of trash. Luckily, the trees were opening up and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large solitary juniper tree, tall brush, and a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something, and it turned out to be a purse, like a large designer purse, and it looked super old, like it had been there a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing, but then I noticed to my horror a tangled mass of hair hair and I froze. Never know something without actually quote unquote knowing something. I knew that this was a dead woman's body down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. Pete, your phone, call the police, that's a dead body over there. And she immediately started dialing 911 because like me, she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we had our attention turned away from the corpse. When we looked back at the body, I swear to God, she was sitting up with her back turned to us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than laying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder like something out of a horror movie and spotted us. She literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and turned to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly advanced on us at a jerking/lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep herself covered. My first thought was that she had been assaulted. She kept trying to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short high-pitched squeaks. As she closed on me, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into a horrible smirk. It still haunts me, and suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself and we had to shout to get her to stop. By this point, we had the cops on the way. We said we had found someone in serious distress. Be that as it may, we both knew this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away, turned, and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said whoever we found must have fled, because they didn't find her. I hope to God she's okay and gets the help she needs. So at around 12 in the morning after I had gotten off work, my boyfriend and I are watching television and had just put a blunt out when there's a knock at the door. We both look at each other in confusion when a second round of knocks goes off. He gets up off the couch, looks out the peephole and recognizes it's a woman that had talked his head off when he was checking these apartments out before moving in. She's, as he describes, in probably her 50s and very annoying. He sees her every morning when he's going to work and she always waits for him to leave first before driving off. He reluctantly opens the door as I take the paraphernalia out of sight. I can hear her voice, but she's speaking incoherently until he apparently deciphers heat and not working, to which he then asks her heat's not working. She says yes and asks him to look at it when our cat walks out the door, so he closed it to pick her up. The lady begins walking upstairs, so he brings the cat back in and follows. He sees the woman standing there as he reaches the top of the steps, and from her doorway she says never mind, it's working me, while all the lights in her apartment were off. Pitch black. She then says you can still come in and take a look at it if you want. He says no and decides not to wait around for anything else weird to happen, so he turns around and descends down the steps, returning to our apartment where he sat in silence for 5 minutes trying to piece together what just happened before recalling me with the story I just told you. Fast forward to 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning. My boyfriend is asleep now when I hear steps coming down the stairs and then, you guessed it, knocking. But fate this time, I know it's not on my door, so I look out the eye hole and there she is again, knocking on my neighbor's door, yelling more incoherent words for a solid 5 minutes. Eventually she just walks away with no answer, but not in the direction of the stairs to her apartment. I hear her walk back upstairs maybe an hour later. Strange. Fast forward to now. She's knocking on our door at 3 in the morning, to which of course she got no answer, but as I'm looking out at the peephole I can see her mumbling to herself as she knocks. She walks away like before, the opposite way of the stairs, and I didn't hear her go back upstairs until 10 minutes ago as she stomped her way up there, obviously very mad. Just a very odd experience I wish I didn't have in the middle of the night while stoned. I'm going to guess early dementia or substance abuse. Update as this happened Friday night. My boyfriend went to his car to go to work Monday morning and noticed a nail drive into the side of his tire. I'm not saying it was her who did this out of rage to her unanswered box, but it was very convenient as he didn't drive all weekend, so there's no telling when it happened. He did however call her complex about the knocking and yelling at all hours of the night. Update 2, it's Thursday now at 1:46 in the morning, almost a week later. Remember how I said my boyfriend normally sees her every morning on his way to work? He hasn't seen her once this entire week. Her car has sat in the same spot as well. Also, we haven't seen a single light from her apartment, not when he gets home at 8 at night nor when I get home at 11 at night. I'm going to see if I'm able to call in a wellness check on her in the morning because I have a feeling something isn't right. I'll continue updating if anything comes about. This just happened to me the other day and I need opinions on whether or not I should be worried. I, a 24-year-old woman, took my son to my mom so she could watch him while I went to work, as she's been doing for the past few years. After leaving her house, I went straight to work, about 7 minutes away. As soon as I pulled up at my job, a truck parked next to me. There are many cars around at other shops as we are directly in town, but I am the only one at my job that morning. I'm thinking it's a customer waiting for us to open, which wouldn't be for another half hour. So I get out of my car with my store key in hand hand, and the man in the truck says, "You work here." I look at him and he doesn't look familiar, maybe in his early 40s. I said, "Yes, I do." We open a tent and smiling, he said, "You get your tire fixed." I wasn't immediately alarmed, just trying to think of how he knew I had tire troubles and where I knew him from. But I didn't know him at all. I told him, yeah, that I had to replace 3 tires because I kept running over nails. He was not from the tire shop or anywhere I had been recently. He told me he had also run over a nail and had to replace a tire. Since I had to go to the bank before opening the store, I told him I would be right back and went inside. When I come back out, he says, "You don't remember me, do you?" I told him no and asked where I met him, and he said that he remembered I had a baby a few years prior, that I used to drive a little gray car around, and that he helped me out when I had car troubles. I asked if it was when I broke down in town a few years ago, and he said, yeah, that was it. Maybe he did, but I do not remember him ever helping me. My family showed up to help me that day and get my car towed. The whole time he is speaking to me, he's grinning, which didn't seem off in that moment. He then says, "Yeah, I've been seeing you pumping air in your tires at the gas station and thought, man, every time I see her in that little red car, she's pumping her tires." And then I thought I knew her from somewhere, but I was kind of scared to say anything cause you know people can be crazy. Okay, reasonable I guess. He sees me at the store a lot. I was having to pump air in my tires once or twice a week for the past several months until I finally got new ones. So I don't know how many times he saw me at the station. I still frequently stop there for gas and snacks. At this point, I'm still thinking he's a customer waiting, so I tell him I gotta go and will be back soon to open. He says, "Alright then, my name's Ron by the way." I wave at him as I go to get in my car, but then he starts backing up his truck and leaves. That is when I realized that he literally just followed me to work to tell me all that. I was taken aback for a second. It took me a few hours to process the whole encounter. I don't even know at what point between my mom's house and my work he saw me and began to follow me, but I do pass that gas station on the way to work. I told my husband on my lunch break. He was concerned and believed something was weird about it, as do my mom and a couple of my close friends. Maybe the guy just thought he was being friendly and thought that was a normal thing to do. He may have just been an odd dude. I personally think it's weird for someone to follow me like that. I know not to trust any and everybody, and that you can never be too careful. Just want to know if I should be watching my back more closely. Just had something happen and needed to write it down somewhere. I went to my bank at around 10:45 at night. They have a drive-through ATM, which is behind the bank, away from street view. When you pull up to the ATM, there's basically a curb on the other side, so you can only go forward or backward. So for example, if a car was to pull up behind me and one went around and pulled up in front of me, I couldn't go anywhere. I'm a 25-year-old dude, 5'11" and built pretty big, so usually I don't have many bad feelings about something. I feel pretty safe in the area I live as well. But as I pull in at the ATM, another car comes behind me, didn't think too much about it, but 10 seconds later, another car pulls up on my right, other side of the curb, and just stays there. Now usually I would just go about my business, but for some reason I had a really bad feeling about how the cars pulled up and how the car to my right just stayed there, doing nothing. There was more than enough space to park randomly in front of the bank, while I stayed next to me and wait there. My gut was telling me to get out of there, so I acted casual, as if I was finishing up, took back my debit card as fast as I could without acting weird, and got out of there. To this day, I tell myself sometimes I probably overreacted, but it kind of haunts me to think how easy it would have been for them to trap me there and force me to give them all I had. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only date I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates, but when I do, I make sure I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places, let either family or friends know where I'm going, and park in a populated place close by to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date initially suggested we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks, and I said no, I don't feel comfortable with that and I only want to meet in public. He seemed alright with this, but then brought it up a few more times, and I said if money is an issue we can meet up another time or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe I chose. I was familiar with this cafe and equidistant to where we both lived. Anyway, he turns up in a two-door car. This detail is relevant, and goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a polite introduction, things begin to get weird. I order a Coke and he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was going to pop into the bar, which is connected to the cafe, and get one. I say no, I'm not drinking, and he looks at me like, "What do you mean?" as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to explain it again pissed me off. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks and the date immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has money but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say of course not, but really I'm relieved this date won't be going any further. Date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car, because that wouldn't make sense. How about we go in my car, but I've got packages in the front so you'll have to squeeze in the back and I'll drop you back off to your car after." A reality that made less sense than me following him in my own car and then driving home from this house after. The fact it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point. I said, "Look, I don't want to go to yours and your insistence is giving me the creeps." Date looks shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet and excuses himself from the table. A few moments later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and driving off. Massive bullet dodged in my opinion. Also, the fact his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. This story happened 15 years ago and I still have shivers in my spine when I think about it. I was a student at a small university where everyone knew each other. All the students in my class were very close to each other. There weren't many of us, so solidarity was the normal. During the third year, 15 Chinese students joined our class, 14 girls and only one man. The girls were very nice and we welcomed them with open arms. They integrated very quickly. The man meanwhile hardly ever spoke. He was very secretive, dressed quite extravagantly, and was always hyper tense or stressed. My closest friends and I tried to push him out of his comfort zone a bit. We used to help each other with studies. We thought that was normal. We quickly realized that it was a mistake. When he spoke to us, which was rare, his words were incomprehensible. He was completely delirious. He always told us about his fascination for death, that music made him want to kill people, that he hated women. We tried not to judge him and just work, but he became more and more comfortable with us, and every day he told us more and more horrible things. After a while, it was rumored that he was harassing a lot of girls in our university. He managed to get their phone number and was calling them day and night, or he was following them down the street to their house. It was extremely creepy and scary for everyone. One girl in particular really didn't appreciate him following her and filed a complaint against him. He was questioned by the police as well as by the headmaster of the university and asked to go to the hospital for a psychiatric treatment. We didn't see him for a few months after that, so we thought he was off for treatment. Then one day, suddenly he reappeared in class, but his gaze had become extremely disturbing. He stared at people for tens of minutes as if he was going to jump at their throats. I felt very bad that day. And then, one day, I learned from a friend that he had come to university with a huge butcher's knife. He wanted to kill the girl who reported him to the police, but since she wasn't in college that day, he went to see her mother, who worked as a secretary in our department, and he killed her. Some teachers present in the building tried to stop him and they were seriously injured. Finally, he was able to be subdued and put in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life. This story traumatized us all, and even years later we never talk about it between us. It was absolutely horrible. After that, I left university because it had become unbearable. After a long week, I was feeling the need to unwind, so I accepted an invitation from one of my friends to join her and a few others for a night at one of the local bars. We played pool, we danced a bit, and we had a few beers. I'm not much of a drinker, it messes with my metabolism, but I had a few pints of beer. I'm 6'1", it's something that works in the world of fighting, but it has, in the past, been a severe source of insecurity for me. Over the years, I've learned to just embrace the insecurities, but every now and then it rears its ugly head. Most of the guys and girls that I date are shorter than me. That's totally fine, but when someone that's 6'5" comes my way and shows interest, I'm more likely to be interested. Maybe it's shallow, maybe it's insecurity. I really don't know, but that's not entirely the point of this story. This guy was very cool. He was an athlete, funny, cute, charming, the whole 9 yards. I beat him at a game of pool. We danced, we had a shot, just had a fun time over the course of a few hours. We exchanged numbers and all was good. Come closing time, he asked if he could walk me to my car. That sounded lovely, and I told him as such. We walked to my car and I thanked him for a fun evening. He grabbed me by the waist and pulled me in for a kiss. I wasn't exactly ready for one, so I gave him a side kiss and told him to give me a call for date. This was apparently not good enough. He wrapped his arms around my waist tighter and pulled me in. I pushed him away and said that I wasn't the kind of person to kiss someone I just met, and I preferred for him to leave me be. This was also not good enough for him apparently, and he pulled me closer. Yeah bro, not going to fly with someone like me. He attempted to nuzzle my neck, but I sent a knee knee to his groin, then gave him a right hook to the chin. He got noticeably angry, completely opposite of the cool and collected individual he had been all night, and started charging at me. I gave him a few hits to the face and few kicks to his side. The whole time he was attempting to hit me, and a few actually hit me, but eventually he got up and said, and I quote, "You're a psychopath." He skulked away in defeat, which was a source of satisfaction for me. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been feeling some irritation in my right chest. I went to my doctor after some bruising started occurring and found that one of my saline implants had ruptured. Normally this wouldn't be the world's biggest problem, but I've been told I need to have it either removed or replaced. I filed a police report, but his name isn't in any kind of system and his phone number is apparently not valid. Ladies, watch yourselves out there. Before I tell the story, it's important to know that my dad is not, by any means, a fighter. He is not an angry man, and if anything, he's a bit meek. So this happened when I, which I'm a 20-year-old woman now, was 6 years old. My dad and I went to the supermarket, and it was one of those grocery stores where there was a hot food section where you could sit and eat, and kids under 10 ate for free. My dad and I were getting food at the buffet, and then we were going to pay at the cash register and go sit down. Now, this whole section of the supermarket was very small. That is, the tables for eating were very close to where you selected your meal. Because my meal was free, I remember asking my dad if I could go sit. He said yes, and he'd be right over again. He was probably going to be, at most, 20 feet away from me if I went to go sit before him. When I sat down, I remember a grown man, about my dad's age at the time, coming to sit directly across from me at the table. The table only sat 2 people. He said, "Do you mind if I eat with you?" And I just remember feeling so scared that I froze and went quiet. I didn't answer even though my 6-year-old impulse was to be polite. He was like my mouth wouldn't open, but the next thing I knew, before I even had time to feel rude for not being able to reply, my dad was right in this guy's face, grabbing him by the shirt collar. I don't remember exactly what he said to the man, but it was the first time, and one of the only times, I've ever seen my dad raging mad. And it was the first time I heard him use a swear word. I couldn't believe that my dad was actually grabbing someone physically. Next thing I know, security came over and my dad had called my mom, who was in the grocery store shopping, and there was a big commotion. Then we left the store. I actually haven't asked my dad about this in such a long time. Probably since I was a teenager, I sort of want to now and ask what ended up happening. This happened a few weeks ago and it was so bizarre that I still think about it every so often. Anyway, I was babysitting my nieces who were 8 and 10 years old since my sister was going out to meet this other girl at a coffee shop. I offered to babysit my nieces since her house was nice and I didn't have anything else to do that night, so I decided why not. At first we just watched movies and played video games together. Later on into the night, I noticed they didn't eat anything and so I asked them if they were hungry. They both replied no at first. That's when I said I could make a quesadilla for them or anything else they want. They still replied no. When I mentioned pizza, they immediately yelled yes. Of course they would. Well, bad idea that night. When I called the local Pizza Hut, I ordered 2 large pizzas to be delivered. Keep in mind that I went outside to make this phone call. Quite loudly I should say because it was dead silent outside. I only went outside because I noticed a bag on the street and I thought it was mine or somebody else's. It was just trash when I looked closely at it. I'm assuming this was the neighbor's trash bag. 20 minutes go by and I hear a doorbell ring. It was the Pizza Hut delivery girl. I paid her in cash and I took the pizzas to the kitchen where my nieces were eating at. This is when the weird stuff happens. Not even 10 minutes go by and I hear the doorbell ring again. I was skeptical at first and looked out the window. It was hard to see much of anything by this point. I opened the door only to be greeted by an old man with a pizza box in his hand. He says to me, "Hello son, I got your pizza that you ordered." I tried to answer in a way that would divert the situation. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't order any pizza. You must have got the wrong location." That's when I tried to close the door, but he pushed his hand hard on the door. "Are you sure?" He replied. I firmly replied back yes, and I closed the door. I thought that was the end of that, until one of my nieces told me, "Why is there a man just standing outside our house?" I was confused, but my heart started to pound when I thought it was the same old man from earlier. I was right. It was the same old man still standing outside the house, with the pizza box still in his hand. I was absolutely livid. I opened the door furiously and yelled at him that I would call the cops immediately. He ran off. My sister arrived 2 hours later and I told her of what happened. She looked immediately concerned and then asked who it was. I told her it was an old man who impersonated a pizza delivery worker. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This took place in 2011. I'm a 29-year-old dude now, but I was 17 at the time living in Illinois. I and my best friend, let's call Simon, had gone out in the evening to celebrate the birthday party of our mutual friend Gabe, and we had taken Simon's dad's rather beat up Buick Century. The party itself went pretty smoothly. It's what happens after where the creepy encounter begins. Simon and I start our way back at around 10 to 10:30 at night. We decided to take the quiet, windy road back home cause it would get us home quicker. As we went through the road, we noticed somebody walking down the side of the road not too far from the nearest gas station. We found it a bit odd because she was going away from the gas station, not towards it, and we didn't see a parked car anywhere in sight. This mysterious person began coming closer towards our car, and we slowed down and got a proper look at who the person was. She was an older woman, probably in her middle to late 30s with blonde hair and fair skin. She looked quite disheveled as well. We wondered if this woman was lost or something, so we stopped our car and she got closer towards us. Before we could ask her if she needed help, she noticed us and stared at us for some time before whispering "hello boys" to us in a rather creepy, soft and seductive tone, as if to try and lure us into something. We didn't know how to respond, but she quickly added, "Want me? Come with me if you do," and she began to start undressing her top in an attempt to flash us, and we knew at that moment she was most likely a hooker. We felt even more creeped out cause first of all we were 18 yet, and this much older woman is obviously trying to lure us into something bad or potentially something worse. Of course we said no, to which the woman responded in the same seductive tone with a creepy smile to top things off. "Well, you don't want me, you say, but I can make you two change your mind and then you are going to come with me." I told Simon we needed to get out of here and he agreed. We started the car as quickly as we could, but not before I looked in the rear view mirror, seeing the woman trying to chase after us, running as fast as she could. I was worried the woman might be able to catch us before we got up to speed, but thank God we were able to escape her. Eventually we reached my home, but we were still completely spooked and shaken, and my older sister had noticed that as well and asked us if we were alright. But we didn't reply and simply nodded. I didn't have the guts to tell her what I encountered that day. There are so many things about this encounter that I think about to this very day, and I still discuss this with Simon as well. What was this woman's motive to look on the streets in the middle of the night for random young guys for whatever knows what, and was she acting alone or part of a deeper scheme? What if we gave in to her demands and went with her? Where would she have taken us? Why did she chase after us? What if she caught us after we tried to leave? I don't know, we can't say, but we both believe we definitely avoided something potentially far worse that night. I only hope that she didn't have any victims. I think this might be more dangerous than what I thought it originally was. But I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting, but it all started when the new school year started in August, and it's only gotten worse since then. Going back to the first incident with him, it was the first day of school, and it was my first day of high school, so I was new to the school. My friends and I were walking around trying to find out classes when I realized I forgot to fill my water bottle, so I told them I'd be right back and went to find a bathroom. Of course then I got lost, so I had to ask someone to help me find the bathroom. I asked the closest person to me, which happened to be him. I ask him if he can show me where the bathroom is. He says yes. I tell him thank you, and we make small talk. He asks if I'm a freshman. I told him yes. He told me he's a junior, and he told me his name. Then he asked mine, which I stupidly told him because he seemed nice enough. So he leads me to the bathroom, and I tell him thanks again, expecting him to walk away, but he didn't. Instead he sat and waited while I filled up my water bottle. I must have given him a look or something, because he then said he is going to walk me to my first class. I said thank you because I thought the gesture was nice. So he walks me to the class, but before I can go in, he asks me for my number, which I stupidly gave him. He texts me that entire class period. I eventually shut my phone off because the text got annoying. After the class was over, my friends and I started walking to our next class. When we ran into him, he pulled me by my arm fairly aggressively like it left bruises, and starts asking me why I didn't respond to any of his texts and how I'm rude and disrespectful. I told him I shut my phone off because I didn't want to get in trouble. He accepted the answer, but I could tell he was still mad. I didn't see him again until the end of the day. I was walking out of the school and going to untie my bike. Because I had biked to school, my house was walking distance. When I was untying my bike, he asked if I was biking home. I said yes because I live close. He offered me a ride, which I politely declined because I didn't know him that well and I didn't feel comfortable. He said okay and left. As I was biking home though, I noticed a black car that was following me all the way to my house and sat at the end of my driveway watching me put my bike away. I wanted to see who it was, and so I went to look, and guess who came out of the car? Hibbo. I asked what he was doing and he said he wanted to make sure I got home safe. off. I said that I was fine and that he didn't have to do that. He insisted it was necessary. I said goodbye and went inside. The next few weeks at school, he would constantly follow me, text me through almost all my classes, and whenever I would talk to anyone else he would get so upset at me he would follow me home with his car every day to make sure I got home safe or something, I don't know. I was getting annoyed of him following me everywhere and constantly having eyes on me, so I ended up telling him to stop following me and blocking his number. He was very angry. After I did that, the next few days after were bad. Every time he ran into me in the halls he would yell at me in front of everyone and say how horrible of a person I am. One time when we were next to the bathrooms he shoved me up against the wall and held me against the wall saying how I better unblock him or else. I didn't know how to respond, but I cried. Thankfully a teacher overheard the whole thing and made him get off of me. He was suspended and that solved the issue at school. But later that night I was at home and it was maybe 10:30 at night. I was watching television when I see someone flashing their headlights directly outside of my window. I look out and it's his car. He doesn't do anything, just sits and keeps flashing his lights. I close my blinds and tell my sister because our mom works overnight so we usually put ourselves to bed and she's back in the morning. Plus my sister's is always home and she's an adult so I'm okay. She goes and looks out the window and he's there still. She locks the door and says to just hang out in the living room and that he probably needed something but it's late and he will have to wait. He came and sat outside my house every night that week. Later they're probably around midnight so my sister was already asleep. I pretended to be, but I was always woken up by his stupid bright headlights. He never did anything, just sat outside my house. But then he just stopped and I got like a week's break. Until this past week, I was getting ready for bed a few nights ago and I saw his headlights again. But this time only for a few seconds and then they shut off and it was only a few minutes before I heard knocking on my window. I lost it and went and got my sister who called the police, but again before they could even come he was gone. I gave them his name and they said they would look into it. He ended up denying ever being at my house so it was just his word against mine because we didn't have cameras. They ended up making him sign something saying he won't come to my house anymore and will keep out of contact with me. I'm not sure what it was though. He didn't come back to my house anymore this week but he has been giving me looks at school, so for the love of God please leave me alone. I'm still scared he might do something worse. This all started about a month ago, starting quote unquote innocently enough that I just didn't really care too much. I live in a townhouse and my neighbor who I share a wall with has had someone recently move in with him, a man who I assume is his brother. The first instance was me laying in bed reading and I could hear some slight breathing or a general sense that I am being listened to. This escalated through the next few weeks with this man whacking it nearly every night when my window was open. I would look outside quickly to see who it was and I could never get a glimpse of this person. I was so confused how they could scale the 6-foot fence back in my yard that quickly. From that it escalated to him whacking it at all hours of the day on random days. On the days he did it he would do it all day. My bedroom window and my living room window and kitchen window downstairs on opposite sides of house. I thought I was losing it, like are there more than one person? How does this person run away so fast? But I was just like whatever. I'm a man too so I didn't feel particularly threatened. I had a bat in each room just in case. This is when stuff went sideways last night. The whacking it was on another level and I kept hearing breathing in my basement and it sounded like someone was in the walls. I kept running to windows and downstairs looking everywhere. Again I could never find this person. This whole night I thought I was losing myself. I was extra vigilant listening in silence in my room. And then I heard it. The man was walking on my roof and peering over where my window was in my bedroom. I freaked out, pushed open my attic and thank God he was not inside the attic, but opening it allowed me to hear his footsteps on the outside roof crystal clear. Every time someone would be walking on his side and potentially see him, he would run back to other side and hide. I called my brother to come try get a picture of him. This part is embarrassing. I pretending I was whacking it off to lure him to my window close. That was when he would go wild. He took off when bro was down there. He was crunching leaves I think, I'm not sure. Well now I know I'm not crazy because I can hear him perfectly clear, and on top of that I can hear him perfectly clear and run back into my neighbor's house when he gets too spooked. Well, this is the really scary part. I have a very small window in the basement in a pretty old house that I had absolutely no idea was even able to be opened. Turns out it can and was unlocked. The man has been in my basement for God knows how many times. For some reason I don't feel particularly that scared. I have a feeling he is disabled or something and feel bad for him. I've seen his hand opening the back door, seeing me and then running back inside, and it was really dirty. I think he is scared of me because he ran so fast in that house when he saw me backyard, but then crawled back out so I couldn't see him from fence, and you guessed it, whacked it off really loud. So I said out loud to him if he doesn't stop going on my roof or entering my house I'm going to tell his brother and the cops potentially. I'm totally assuming this but I have a feeling the brother took him in because he had nowhere to go and is disabled in some way, so I'm scared he will kick him out. Now all my windows are locked top and bottom, and at least it's almost winter, so at least I don't mind to keep windows shut. I told the police non-emergency what's up and identify him in case there has been any other instances in neighborhood and or I have the bat as ribs one day in my house. This happened a few years ago, but I still feel uneasy every time I see a car that looks similar to this one. I am a weed smoker, and usually when I'm alone I love to light a joint and relax. I had just moved into a new apartment, and I didn't want to risk upsetting neighbors or worse violating my lease by smoking inside, so I went out to my car to smoke in the parking lot. It was at around 12. I parked my car a ways down from my apartment so none of my new neighbors could see me. I was worried about making a bad impression. I was at the end of a dead-end street with one street light lit for the area. There are parked cars around me, but it is dead silent outside, so I assumed I was the only one in the area. I smoked my joint, listened to music, and scrolled on my phone until I was ready to head back to my place. I was in this spot for about half an hour. Again, there was no cars coming in or out during this time. There was also no people around either. Once I decided to head back, I backed my car out of the spot and angled it to begin driving down the road. Immediately, a blue Ford Fusion pulls out of the parking spot a few down from me and pulls right in front of me, facing me, and blocking my way. We both sat there for a few minutes and I began to become scared. I was blocked in and this car was not moving. Its headlights were blinding. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally drove forward and moved to the side, very slowly. I drove past it as it sat there still. I tried to glance in the window as I passed to get a look at who the person was, but they were tinted. I drove to my apartment and ran inside as fast as I could. I spent the rest of the night feeling uneasy. I was scared they would come to my door. My boyfriend came over the next day and I told him what had happened, how I had a gut feeling something wasn't right. It wasn't a person playing a prank, but someone genuinely wanted to scare me. A week goes by and I didn't see the car, so I thought it was just a one-time event. My boyfriend and I decided to go grab some food, so we pulled out of my neighborhood and stopped at the stop sign before we entered the main road. As we're sitting at the stop sign, I see the blue Ford Fusion pulling in, passing me. It felt like slow motion. I tried looking into the window again, but couldn't see past the tent. Despite this, I could feel the person inside that car staring at me. I started to panic and pointed to the car and told my boyfriend that's it. That's the car that blocked me in the parking lot. I pulled out from the stop sign, and as I did, I could see this car in my rear view mirror turning around and begin to follow me. I began making sharp random turns in an attempt to lose them, however they were on my tail. I was shaking and close to tears at that point. Eventually I did lose the car, and that was the last time I saw it. I still wonder, why did they follow me? What did they want from me? Was it a joke? Or did this person have the intentions my gut was telling me they did? It's been 2 years, and every time I see a blue Ford Fusion, my first instinct is to check for tinted windows. So this experience has stuck in my mind and I remember it like yesterday. When I was probably 10 or 11, year was probably 2000 or 2001, I was at our local park with a friend riding our bikes. And this particular park was super cool because it was practically a skater slash biker's dream. There was stairs and ledges and natural jumps built into the layout of this patio plaza, which then led down to a sandy beach line of our local lake. So normally it's pretty busy and you get kicked out by random hero adults or lifeguards telling you that you can't have fun here and to go elsewhere, but this was an overcast, kinda cooler middle to lower 50 degrees kind of day, so the park was completely empty besides me and my buddy. So after an hour or two we're starting to get bored and noticed it was getting late in the day, maybe about 5:30 or 6 in the afternoon, and sunset was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half away tops. I'm talking dark, no more sun, street lights all kind of sunset. About 30 minutes prior to this I had noticed a van, I think it was either white or possibly off-white like eggshell colored, pull up in the parking lot and parked facing us directly, which was probably about 300 to 400 feet away. I couldn't see the driver too well, but I know for a fact he never got out and nobody got in. At first no big deal, but after about 30 to 45 minutes, during which I would occasionally look in his direction every 5 to 10 minutes or so, and every last time he was staring straight dead ahead at us. He wasn't preoccupied with anything or anyone else. My buddy started to notice this too, and while I started to get this weird feeling something wasn't right, I didn't mention it in such a way that would seem like I'm thinking, this guy's going to kidnap us and do weird stuff to us. I simply replied, yes, I noticed him too, that's odd, but left it at that. So it's now about 20 to 30 minutes before dark and we've gathered our things and decided to leave. Luckily there was a really busy gas station across the street from the park, maybe a fourth to half a mile from the parking lot slash plaza area. But as we start making our way down one of the multiple paved walkie paths that lead to the exit, me and my friend noticed this van had started its engine and was proceeding to back out of the parking spot. So now we're a little on edge, and we rushed to the mini market. We go inside and both were like, what? And thought that was kind of startling, but proceeded to wait in line to buy our candy and momentarily forgot about what just happened. Unfortunately, as we walked out the door of the store, we see the same janky van sitting across the 4-lane roadway at the park's turn and entrance with his blinker on, just sitting there. And mind you, we were in the store a good 5 to 7 minutes. There's no way he couldn't have safely merged into traffic. Luckily for my friend, he lived maybe 5 minutes away from the mini market, just had to ride straight behind the mini market about 10 to 12 blocks, all of which was 2 or 3 heavily lighted residential type roads straight home. And unfortunately for me, my house was probably about 15 minutes away, maybe less, but I had to ride north of the gas station mini market along this kind of rural highway / higher speed road, like 45 to 50 miles per hour with no houses directly on it, and a street light every like half a mile if I'm lucky, before turning onto a different 25 miles per hour rural kind of road that was sparsely dotted with houses, before taking a third turn onto my heavily populated normal neighborhood that has eyes and ears. It would certainly see a child getting abducted. My friend pretty much was like, best of luck, I'm out, and took off towards his, while I started my short ride back home as well. So I'm about to turn off the higher speed highway kind of road and look over my left shoulder as I turn right, and what do I see? That same van driving by my road, and after passing me also immediately starting to slow down. It was like slow motion. I can still picture the fear I felt when I saw the brake lights on the van. Mind you, he didn't slam on the brakes or do anything that would draw attention or be considered erratic or reckless, but my first instinct and thought was he was slowing down to turn around and double back. I never, even to this day, had ridden / pedaled a bike as fast or as hard as I did that evening. Literally every once of my being was put into going faster than I had ever gone, the entire time thinking this van is going to pull up next to me and do whatever. I was pedaling so hard, just staring straight at the ground, focusing on my feet, that I almost ran into a parked car like 2 blocks from my house. It was literally inches away from running head on into the car. I never bothered to look back once I saw those brake lights. I didn't want to know how close or far whoever was driving that van was from me. All I knew is I was scared, and best believe I'm not going to be kidnapped without the perpetrator having to work for it. Anyway, I made it home but never told my parents. Even to this day, I never brought it up, and I don't know why. So this happened a few years ago, and my brain is still fuzzy because honestly I've kind of blocked this out from my memory. My older sister, who was 23 at the time, and myself, when I was 20 at the time, went to Washington DC one year, and I was super excited because I'd never been before. We started the trip with a private tour of the Capitol building where one of her friends worked at the time. I was honestly super stoked. Even though I had already become disenchanted with politics at that age, it was still really cool to be in the building and learning about the history of the country. After that, we went to the Smithsonian and just genuinely had a lot of fun educating each other in the different subject we were always into. I was always more math than science oriented, and she was English and history. At the end of one of the days, we were headed to the metro station to get a train back to our hotel. Now, I'd been on train platforms like this before, having visited my uncle in New York City a couple of times, and since then been stationed in Chicago with their metro system, so I have a pretty good understanding of how trains and stops work. My sister said she needed to go to the bathroom and to wait for her before I got in the train, and I told her all right before making my way to the kiosk to reload my card. While I was at the kiosk, I got this feeling that someone was looking at me, that overwhelming feeling of just being watched, and it was uncomfortable. I turned my head a little, and there, standing in the corner, was what I can only assume to be a homeless man based off his appearance, staring right at me with huge eyes. At first, I thought nothing of it, as we had people like this back home in Florida too, and went back to what I was doing. I pulled out my phone and started playing a game or something while I waited. Before long, my sister came back and we got on our train. We talked for a bit about what time we were getting up the next morning to catch our flight back, since it was later in the day around noon. When she started to open her mouth, I froze. Standing in the back of the train car, staring at both of us, was the same man I'd seen earlier. I'll never forget his outfit: a dirty gray hoodie, matted brown hair, a face that looked like he suffered from heavy substance abuse, dingy skin, ragged blue jeans, and shoes with holes in them. I leaned in, not breaking eye contact, and said, "That guy was staring at me earlier, and now he's still watching us on the train." She looked at him and whispered, "If he gets off when we do, we'll make a dead sprint to the hotel." Honestly, I don't know why we didn't call the police, but knowing where our hotel was, on the end of town where things started to get sketchier, I don't think it would have made much difference for response time. The train stopped at our station and we got off. I didn't see the man follow us, so I thought we were fine. It was still about a 5-block walk to the hotel and in a really sketchy part of town. It's not that we were cheapskates, it's just all we could afford in all honesty. As we walked, we continued our previous conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned around and saw the man hidden behind a brick wall, peeking out. I froze. My sister turned around and saw him too. When he realized he'd been busted, he stood straight up and gave a big, cracked grin and just kept staring. I wanted to challenge him, being 6'3" and 215 pounds at the time, and yell, "What do you want?" But I remembered my previous encounter with someone following me and just froze, barely squeaking out, "What?" It was about this time the man started walking towards us. I wasn't frozen anymore. We both started a dead sprint toward the hotel. As terrifying as the situation was already, what happened next still makes every hair on my body stand straight up. The man screamed absolute nonsense loudly before letting out a cackle, chasing after us. I was lagging behind my sister a little so she could get to safety before me. She was smaller than me and I knew, if I needed to, I could maybe fight this guy. I grabbed my wallet from my pocket and pulled out the room key, since it was one of those hotels where you needed to have a key to access the building. Once we were inside, I realized just how far away the guy was from me. I played football in high school, and I was still pretty fast, and I had to have had about 10 or 15 yards between us, even if I was running slower. We didn't say anything. We just went upstairs to our room and made sure it was locked in every way possible. We left super early and took an Uber to the airport. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I, a 36-year-old woman, wish this wasn't real. Let me start by saying it's crazy how children are so trusting. Maybe it was just me. When I was 7 years old, my parents and I were living in a basement apartment in the Bronx. The way the apartment was set up had my mother and father's room at one end of a short hall, the bathroom in the middle, and my room at the other end. If you don't know anything about a basement apartment, just know that it doesn't take much effort to enter one through a window. One very early morning, possibly around 7 or 8, I was woken up by a very hard sharp-like pain on my butt cheek. I got up thinking our cat had gotten in my room and it bit me as she used to nip hard and attack at whatever she felt like, toes included. I jumped up looking for her only to see a grown man sitting on my bed. I remember being upset and asking him why did he pinch me, to which he hushed me and said something about him being thirsty. I remember pulling down my nightgown to cover my butt and asking him if he wanted juice or water. I wasn't scared at all, more surprised and mad that this man pinched my butt hard. He said that he wanted juice, so I left my room and closed my door with him still sitting on my bed. I walked to the kitchen and got him some juice. As I was bringing the cup back to my room, I looked at my parents' door and thought that I should wake them up, but can't remember why I decided against it. I ended up giving the man the cup and he drank the juice. I remember he asked me if I could help him find his friend and him telling me he was lost. I remember that my dad had told me that I wasn't allowed to go outside without him or my mother. They were worried as this was a new neighborhood. We had only moved into maybe 2 weeks earlier. I remember being scared to go outside because I didn't want my parents to be upset with me, so I told him that I had to wake up my parents to ask. I remember he said that it would be real quick because he knew his friend was somewhere in the area and we would find him quickly. I once again said no and told him that I was not allowed to go outside without my parents, so he ended up saying that he didn't need my help anymore and that he would find them. He asked me to lock the door behind him, so I walked him out and locked the front door, waving him goodbye. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was too late. I was awake, so I started watching cartoons. Well, the volume happened to be louder than expected because my mother woke up and asked me, very angrily, why was I awake so early. I told her all about the man pinching my butt hard, to which at first she didn't believe me as she thought I had a quote-unquote bad dream, but she lifted up my nightgown and I guess I must have had a bruise. I will never forget how she got so calm and she started smiling at me and with a very sweet voice started asking me what did he look like, what happened, and if I remember what he was wearing. I told her, to which she left my room for a moment, coming back with my dad. She then told me to tell him everything using that same sweet voice, and I did. I didn't think I was in trouble or anything and I thought I had made a new friend. After telling them about my new friend, they got dressed and started searching. Well, it didn't take long because he happened to be the Super's family member. When I saw him, I immediately shouted at him, "Hey friend." My parents told me to go inside, which I did. Maybe an hour or so later, my parents came back with McDonald's for me, but they seemed angry. Before the end of that day, my father put a padlock on my door and told me that whenever I go to sleep to always lock my door as our kitchen windows didn't lock. That's how we got in. Sometime later, I was 15 at this time, I found out that the guy was mentally ill and was sent away from Dominican Republic by his family so he wouldn't get arrested for something he did out there with another little girl. It still surprises me that I wasn't scared. Please, if you or anyone you know lives in a basement, ground level apartment or flat, please triple check that all the window locks work and lock your windows up. I just need to decompress on this. Looking back, I don't believe I was necessarily in immediate danger, but I feel a lot of that had to do with being in the right company at the right time. I, a 29-year-old woman, run barbells, and this past weekend we had a rodeo. Normally the rodeo scene is rowdy, but it's mostly working class folk that are unwinding. There's always a lot of beer and a lot of competition. It's normally a safe enough environment, but I've always been one to keep my guard up. As I was leaving, a guy had struck up conversation with me. He gave me the whole "I saw you riding, you did really good" routine. I thanked him. We talked for a little while, but I was neglecting the group of people that I was there with, so I told him politely that I needed to go, but maybe I'd see him again. Should have chosen my words a bit more carefully. Around 1 in the morning, I was sitting outside of my camper having a smoke and a glass of wine before going to sleep. It's not uncommon for people to still be roaming around at this time. I saw the silhouette of a man walking towards me. The same guy from earlier approaches me with 2 open beer bottles and has a seat in a chair near me. He asked if he could take me up on my offer. A bunch of things started going through my head. What offer? Though maybe I'll see you again. And I'm definitely not taking an open beer from someone that appeared out of nowhere. And how did you find my camper? I told him that I was about to turn in and that he needed to leave. This was extremely inappropriate and invasive of my personal space. He just smiled and kept drinking from his beer bottle. Let's have some fun, he said. What? Like what is your criminal malfunction? That one sentence, as simple as it is, gives me goosebumps. What part about no and leave don't people understand? I told him one more time, no, and that he needed to get away from my camper. He stood up and made more advances. I attempted to get into my camper, which is where I pack heat, but he made a move for the door. She said, "No, my guy." I heard from behind me. I turned around and saw that my older and younger brother were standing there with a group of their friends. Apparently they went and closed down a strip club, which they considerately didn't invite me to. I don't know if they moved in stealth mode, or I was just paying more attention to the creep in front of me, but they really showed up at the right time. My older brother is 6'3" and has the build of a medium-sized refrigerator. My younger brother is an army veteran and stands at 6 feet. The man simply apologized and began making his way out of my space. My older brother told him not to come back. I gave them both the biggest hug. I was really lucky to have them show up when they did. I was lucky enough to have gotten the guy in a picture while I was taking a photo with a friend. We talked to the head of security about it in the morning and they said that they would deal with it. Not sure how that will be handled, but I'm glad something is being done. I know I was in theoretical danger, but that's just my thought process because the act of danger was prevented. I know I should be more cautious sometimes, and I'm working on it. One thing is for sure though, no matter what happens with whoever, I'm not going to stop existing because of it. This scene happened when I was 21 years old. It is in a smaller town outside of a huge city in the Midwest. This was 1981. I worked at fast food and they stayed open until 3 in the morning. My then husband worked for a bowling alley as a manager and he was never off before 2 in the morning. I was expecting my first child and business was slow, so I was sent home about 1 in the morning. In the town we lived in there was a large private girls' college. Women were being warned to lock their car doors because 2 males were still on the loose that were targeting women around my age. They were sometimes following them home and attacking or forcing a woman alone late at night off the road. The men were violating and killing the women. They had killed 3 women by this point. 2 of the women were found on deserted roads and 1 in her apartment. There was no description of these men or what kind of vehicle they drove. I left work, climbed into my car, locked my doors, and started for home. The hair on the back of my head stood up on end and my gut feeling told me something was very wrong. I figured out that I was being followed home. I took several turns around town trying to shake this car, but to no avail. The advice given was that if you thought you were being followed, to drive to the police station. We had recently moved to this area, so I had no idea where the police station was. I was terrified, panicked, and couldn't think what to do. This was in the days of no cell phones, but the pay phones were made in different areas where you could drive up to them, sit in the driver's seat, put your window down, and the pay phones had a longer cord to enable you to stay in your car and talk. You still had to deposit money in order to talk even when you were calling 911. I thought briefly about trying to get to one of these phones, but I was too scared and didn't think I could have a coin ready in time before these men could have time to approach me. My parents lived about 4 streets over from where I lived, and I decided the safest decision was to try to make it to my parents' house. I was still being followed when I got to my parents' house. There was a short block you could go around by my parents, and I went around this block about 3 times, and every time I did I honked the horn. You would have thought laying on the horn would have discouraged these creeps for continuing to follow me, but it had no effect. If anything, they moved in closer behind me. I pulled into their driveway and these creepers pulled right in behind me, turned their lights off, and I heard their doors open and shut. I was beyond terror. At this point, they were out of their car, one coming up on one side and one on the other. My parents' house was a split level and you pulled up in front of a double car garage. In order to get in the house, you had to go in through garage door or front door, and front door was to left a driveway about 2 car lengths away plus a set of steps. I laid on the horn again. They still kept coming. My dad, who is retired military, oftentimes stayed up late at night watching television. Thank God he did this night. All of a sudden, he turned the porch light on and burst out the front door. He assessed the situation instantly and started yelling at these creeps to get away from my car, all the while barreling down the steps towards them. At first, they didn't retreat very fast, but must have thought better. My dad is very big boned and about 6'4". He had a brother that played in college football and he wore a size 15 shoe. He made it to the front of their car and pounded on the hood of it before they were able to burn rubber reversing out of the driveway. While he was unable to get a license number because they didn't have a front plate, he was able to describe them and give make and model to police. Police told me how fortunate I was that my dad had realized what a dire situation I was in. I still get chills thinking back to that night. I remember it as if it were yesterday. My dad said he thought he heard a car honk more than once, and then he heard me in the driveway. He had just shut off the television and was heading for bed when I pulled in. Thank God my dad acted so quickly, or I might not be writing this today. This incident has caused me to be hyper aware of my surroundings, and I never turn into my driveway without making sure I am not followed. Always be mindful of where you are and don't walk around with your headphones on or phone pressed to your ear. You never know when you may be an opportunistic moment for someone with ill intentions. Know where your local police station is, and if you ever get chills something is wrong, drive into the police station. The police did capture these creeps about 2 weeks later, and they didn't get a 4th victim. They were both on probation for kidnapping and violating women and served their time and decided killing their victims left no witnesses. My dad is still my hero today. His quick actions prevented me from being the 4th victim. In the color, model, and make of car my dad described was the description of what they were driving when they were arrested. This happened about 10 years ago when I lived in Boston with my husband. I had totally forgotten all about it, but something I read today reminded me of it. We lived in this old crappy building in Jamaica Plains. It was our first place out of college and it was cheap. That's all that mattered at the time. The building was one in a row of other apartment buildings that had separate entrances but shared a common roof and basement. So you could enter one building, walk down to the basement, and access the basements of the other buildings. Yeah, not very safe. The shared laundry room for the 3 to 4 buildings was in the basement, and I hated being down there. It was cold and always had that eerie fluorescent lighting with 1 or 2 lights flickering that just made you depressed. Most of the other residents were college students and were at class during the day. I worked nights back then, so I used some of the daytime hours to do laundry since the laundry room was pretty empty at that time. Luckily on this day, my husband was off from work too, so we were just hanging out, taking breaks from watching Netflix and cooking to go down there and load up the machines. When we went down there to get our last load from the dryer, it still had a few minutes left, so we decided to wait for it. While we were talking, this man speed walked into the laundry room. I was sitting on top of one of the broken machines and there was a list of do not do things on the wall that said not to do that. So at first I thought he was coming to give me a hard time about it, but then I noticed that he was really disheveled looking. His clothes were dirty, he hadn't brushed his hair or shaven for a long time, and he looked like he was definitely on something. He came up to me and held out this large piece of colored craft paper and said, "You need to have this." I took it and looked down at it. It looked like something that kids would make at Sunday school, or maybe something that would be posted on a pin-up board at a church and listed the 10 commandments. Well, 6 or 7 of them because it had been ripped. His eyes looked totally crazed, massive pupils and bloodshot. He was looking at my body in a creepy way. He was either on a ton of something or was having a mental health episode. Maybe both. He seemed like he was waiting for me to say something back and getting a bit impatient about it, but I didn't exactly know what to say. My mind was just stuck on reboot. I was trying to think of rational reasons he would give a stranger a piece of craft paper with some commandments on it, but there probably wasn't a rational reason. My husband broke the silence and said, "Hey man, thanks a lot. This is great." The guy seemed satisfied with that, mumbled something and went out of the laundry room and back into the connecting hallway. Once he was gone, we got our laundry, went upstairs and called the landlord. She called the cops, but once they got there they couldn't find him. I highly doubt they searched all the floors of all the buildings, but he could have left. I don't know if he would have hurt me if I was alone, but I definitely wouldn't have diffused or handled the situation as easily. Needless to say, I never went down there alone again. This happened when I was 14. I'm 17 at the moment and still linger on the memory. I was home alone that night as my mom was working an overnight shift and my older brother didn't live at home at the time, so therefore I had the house to myself. I'd say it was maybe 9 or 9:30 at night, and I was in my room working on homework and listening to music with my headphones in, loud enough to where I really couldn't hear things. I remember for a fact that all of the doors were locked, and I stayed home alone pretty often, so I didn't have a reason to worry. Maybe an hour later, I decided to take my headphones out and take a break from homework. I heard noises in my kitchen and footsteps walking around downstairs, which was odd because my mom wasn't supposed to be home until 7 the next morning, but she could have taken an early night for whatever reason. But just to make sure, I locked my bedroom door and texted her asking if she came home. It took her about 10 minutes to respond, but when she did, she said no, she was still at work, and why I asked. At that point I was freaking out because my mom and brother are the only ones with keys into the house, and myself of course, so I decided to text my brother. Sure enough, he said no, he wasn't in the house, so I told both him and my mom about the situation, and my brother wasn't far from the house, so he said he would be there soon and to call the cops. As I was trying to find a hiding spot in my room with my phone to call the police, I heard my name called from downstairs. That got me thinking, did whoever was in the house know me personally, a family friend maybe? I didn't respond out of fear of who knew my name it was calling it, and I didn't recognize the voice. I called the cops and was on the phone with them when my name was called again, followed by I know you're up there, and I heard someone starting to walk up the stairs. Again, I didn't respond, but I was pure terrified. The police assured me they were on the way and to stay put. I was still texting my brother. While this was all happening, he informed me he was 5 minutes away. That's when I heard the front door slam. After I heard the door slam, about 5 minutes later, the police arrived and assured me it was them and that I could come out. Shortly after my brother arrived back home, the police looked around the property and all over the house, but there was no trace of whomever was once here. However, there was damage on the door and lock from being forged open and looked to be done by some sort of tool to pick the lock. Everything turned out okay because nothing was taken, oddly enough. But the upsetting part is whomever was in my house wasn't found. From that night forward though, we got cameras installed and got a better lock. At the time of this story, I was 17 to 18. I'm a woman. This was back in 2021 to 2022 when I worked at a grocery store. So the first coworker, we'll name him Liam. Liam was in his middle to late 20s but looked younger. One day as I was working self-checkout, and when working self-checkout you have to put bags away at each station. So as I talked to Liam for a split second and he gave me his number. It was chilly, I thought nothing of it. However, an important note is that I blush at everything. So when we talked and I blushed, I think he took it the wrong way. Well, someone told him my age. I thought everyone knew I was underage because on my badge it had an asterisk next to it at my job meaning underage. Well, he sent me a long text message asking if I was about to turn 18 and if so he would wait for me to turn 18 to have screw with me. The creep, I know. I showed some coworkers, but since sadly he did his job, I was told not to say anything because even if I did they would keep him there. So I gave up and just blocked him. Now Liam works with the other creep, let's name him, who was younger to middle 20s. We was somehow on a whole other level of creep. I only worked at this job for a year because it got so bad with Will. Will, when I first started, seemed like a normal guy with a ton of piercings. The first time me and Will talked was when he was helping me find stuff and showing me where to put it. At that time he seemed nice enough, but something in me was kind of iffy about him. My brain knew something, but I shrugged it off and he went back to work after a co-worker told him to. I just worked, and after a few months there I gave him 2 rides to his house where nothing weird happened. He never did anything to me, but looking back I wish I never did. At this point I'm 18 and it's winter in the Midwest. Will became creepier once he found out I knew about him. My coworkers told me about how he made a list of the underage girls and ranked their butts, all underage every single one, and did other things to the minors like groping them. After finding that out, I looked at him in a new light and everything he said was creepy to me, such as telling me details of his bed life, dating a minor while I worked there, flirting with me and making inappropriate comments, and just other things of that same nature. And yes, I did tell him I was uncomfortable, and no, it didn't stop him. Well, one day on my break I worked up the courage to confront him. This man had the best manipulation tactics and almost threw me off if I wasn't so solid on it, saying I didn't do that and if I did it was a joke. Then I broke down crying in front of me. I ended the conversation with I no longer want to be friends with you, and after that it seemed fine. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The minute I came back inside and went to self-checkout he immediately talked to a guy, let's call him Dave. Dave told me a month before I quit that Will was trying to say I was making things up about him and how I was a bad person, but at the time Dave lied to me saying that Will wasn't telling him about that situation. Then a guy at work, shout out out to you, Jay. If you ever see this, somehow you're a hero. He listened to me and I broke down with him and what happened. Well, apparently Jay's wife came in and Will hit on her immediately. That's the type of person Will was, a creep. I called my UD rep and cried to him for about an hour on the phone. I told them everything I could, but nothing came of it besides my bosses saying hush and giving me a 50-cent raise. Thanks. Anyway, after that, Will made my life miserable and would always try to be close to me, knowing the higher ups told him to stay away. It got so bad I was breaking down every shift because he was making me so uncomfortable. Well, I had enough of it, and the higher ups asked me nicely why, and I told them Will still wasn't leaving me alone, and even though I put my 2 weeks and I made it to 1 to 2 more shifts before I just stopped showing up altogether thanks to Will. After I quit, they questioned a lot of people and had enough evidence to fire him. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I decided to spend my day fly fishing on the river with some of my friends. What started as a pretty common day of fishing ended up being a very uncomfortable one. My friends and I hit the river a little bit before noon. We have a specific spot that we usually go to that isn't frequented very often, but due to the weekend, they did have more people than normal. Not as much in comparison to other areas, but still more than usual. There were 4 of us in total, but we scattered around the riverbank. For the most part, I had eyes on everyone though. Right next to where I had my stuff set up, a gentleman decided to lay his own stuff down and even set up a folding chair near mine. I was fishing, so I didn't really care, but after I caught one, I went to put it on ice, and that's when this guy initiated conversation. He introduced himself and I gave him my name, but didn't offer much more. He started making small talk, which I'm not a fan of. I never know what to say. I grabbed a beer from one of our ice chests, and he asked if he could bum one. I feel that was a bit of a rude question, but I gave him one as a good gesture because it was a holiday weekend. We always usually end up making friends with somebody, and offering a beer or two is usually one of our customs as a group, so this wasn't extremely off. But people generally wait until we offer is the point I'm getting at. I got back in the river and cast my line out. He stood about 5 feet away from me and kept talking. I listened to him, not that I had much choice, but gradually started moving away from him. He kept following me, which is a big no-go for me. He started making some very inappropriate comments and asked some very inappropriate questions. Some are as follows: do you have a boyfriend? I'll probably be a lesbian after this. Are you wearing a push-up bra? I'm wearing waders, so how can you possibly get that inaccurate information? When was the last time you did the dirty? Probably more recently than you did. What's the biggest you've ever had? In this river, about a 10-pound largemouth. I know what you mean and I'm not biting. You want to go and have some fun. I was having plenty of fun before you showed up. I got tired of the questions and am not taking the hint, so I moved downstream where one of my guy friends were. I told him the guy was bugging me and I needed to find a new spot. My friend started waddling out of the river to go talk to him, but he had moved away by that time. With the guy gone, we were able to continue fishing in peace. After a couple more hours on the river, we collected our belongings and headed back to the parking lot of the fly shop we parked at. Moving all of our gear back and forth took about an hour by itself, and in that time, I noticed that the creep was still around. I told my friend about it again, but I stopped him and my other friend from going over to him. Didn't seem worth the trouble. Plus the guy stood at about 6'4" to 6'5" based on my observations, and I just didn't want anyone getting hurt on my behalf. After about another hour, we all parted ways for the time being, but we're going to meet up later to cook our catch. I went into the fly shop to grab a Coke, which left me as the only remaining one from our group. This is where the story gets scarier in my opinion. I was at my truck and had removed my waders and threw them in the back. Then I grabbed a shirt from my bag to change into. Lo and behold, look who walks up. Here myself is alone in a parking lot and not close enough to the shop to go for help. And this creep refers to my shorts as coochie cutters. He was getting dangerously close to me, so I told him to get away. When he continued, I officially felt threatened. I grabbed my pistol from my truck door and gave him 45 reasons that he would be making a mistake. He immediately turned around and said he was just joking. He then proceeded to speed walk back towards the tree line. I drove away, feeling surprisingly normal, but pulled over at one point and started crying. I pulled into a gas station on my way home when I saw a wildlife and fisheries agent, where I explained the encounter and filed a report. He told me that he would contact the sheriff's office, who did reach back out to me this morning, where I filed a separate report. Unfortunately, I know how police reports go, and I know this guy won't be investigated, but I think I dodged a bullet, and so did he. From now on, I'll be sure to keep company with me until I'm ready to leave. I had the strangest experience while on my regular commute to work this morning and felt I wanted to share as I can't get this off my mind. I, a 26-year-old woman, took my regular bus route I take to work. For context, this is a 1 hour and 30-minute bus journey. I got on the double-decker bus and sat in my usual spot upstairs. The bus is completely empty when I get on, until this man comes upstairs. I have my headphones on so I can't hear him trying to speak to me. Only when I saw a waving in my face did I notice he was sat in front of me. He asked, "May I sit next to you please?" Me, being the shy, non-confrontational person I am, stupidly said yes. He comes and sits next to me so close that we're touching, and with every small move I make to be further away from him, squishing myself up against the window, he sits closer. He starts by introducing himself and asks me for my name. I knew where this was going and felt like this would be a typical case of flirting which I could easily dismiss. He asks if I live alone as one of his opening questions to me, to which I promptly replied stating I had a long-term boyfriend. He told me he's unsurprised as I'm a beautiful girl. I sit uncomfortably trying my best to ignore him and stare out the window. Every time I do this, he taps my shoulder to gain my attention. He tells me how I'm the first person in a long time to allow him to speak to them, and how he is incredibly lonely and how he feels he has no purpose. He asks how he could meet someone like me along with other questions relating to making friends. He asks me where I'm going and I say I'm going to work. He tells me he's leaving the bus at a certain spot but would love to stay on the bus with me and accompany me to work. For context, his stop was 30 minutes into the journey. He would need to stay on for an extra hour to do this. My heart dropped when he said this, in my head figuring out what to do if he wouldn't leave and stayed on the bus with me. I told him I didn't want him to which he replied saying it's okay. He was sure he would see me on the bus again. He asked me what days and time of the week I worked to make sure he would be on the bus to get to know me better. I responded with a lie saying I very rarely get this bus and how I never normally work at this time. He carries on and asks if I would be his friend, practically begging while telling me how much of a failure in life he is. I told him sure, to which he acted elated, thanking God and telling me that I made his entire life. He was telling me how he had plans to cook dinner for me. I tried my hardest to ignore him. However, he keeps tapping my shoulder asking me various questions in an attempt to get to know me better. He asks me specifically what my goals and aspirations are in life. I keep my answers vague and short. He tells me now that we have met it is his goal in life to become my best friend. We get towards his stops and he asks for my number. I tell him no. He then asks for my social media. I tell him no. He looks physically hurt by this. He shakes my hand once more and says he hopes he sees me again soon. That interaction was so creepy. I was a second-year college student when this took place. I was coming back home from college, which was only a 20-minute drive. Every day, I get off the bus, walk through a narrow path which led to a set of railway tracks, and wait for my brother to pick me up on the opposite side of the railway tracks. My mother always warned me to be careful at that place since it was a hangout spot for crackheads. I've never encountered anyone, though. One day, as I was walking to my waiting spot, I noticed a guy, probably in his middle to late 20s, looking at me and somewhere further away simultaneously while walking away. I wondered what his deal was but shrugged it off. I reached my waiting spot and there was no one else besides me. A couple of minutes went by when I heard someone coughing. This seemed strange since I was the only one there. The sound came from somewhere behind me, so I turned to look back. There was a person standing probably 50 meters away from me. He appeared to be in his early to middle 40s. He was way too well dressed to assume he was a crackhead. He was standing behind a pillar which was somewhat secluded and was staring at me. At first, I thought he might be peed or something, but to my horror, he was whacking it. He wanted to make his presence and what he was up to known to me. I felt disgusted. In my 20 years of life, I had never been in any situation like this before. I froze and didn't know what to do. That's when I realized my ex-boyfriend worked in a building right in front of me. We were on good terms at that time, even though we had broken up, or at least that's what I thought. I texted him, explaining everything in hopes that he'd help me. Yeah, I was dumb. However, to my surprise, he replied, "Why are you asking me for help? I'm not your boyfriend anymore. Go ask your current boyfriend." My boyfriend and I were in a long-distance relationship, so there was no way he could make it there on time. This was truly shocking since I never expected him to behave that way, especially when I was in a potentially dangerous situation. I felt helpless. I could still see the man through my peripheral vision, whacking it without taking his eyes off of me. I wasn't ready to give up on myself. I gathered the courage and started to walk away. I walked to another spot where there were other people and waited there. Looking back, I really regret not recording the man in the act and reporting him to the cops. but I was too shocked to think straight. I never saw him again, even though I continued taking the same route because why should I back down fearing a pervert who couldn't control himself? Later, I realized that the first guy probably saw this man whacking it and chose to walk away silently even though he saw me walking at the same direction. My heart goes out to the family of the creepy guy. What if they don't know anything about his malicious acts and consider him the best son, husband, or father? I'm a 29-year-old woman, and while I'm well-traveled and have been around quite a bit, I do occasionally make some pretty rookie mistakes. My fault, and I make no excuses. I try to remain diligent and alert, but I'm very capable of letting my guard down. So after being here in the United States for about 2 months, I decided that I was bored sitting around my unit watching 90 Day Fiancé, so I decided to make the old dating profiles again. I made no specific intentions known about what I was interested in accomplishing, as I don't really know myself. I just wanted someone to hang out with and see where it goes naturally. I ended up matching with this one guy who had shared interests with me. We chatted a bit over the app and eventually I felt okay to give him my number. After talking back and forth for a couple of weeks, I agreed to a meetup. We met at a pub and have a couple of drinks. I'll admit at first I didn't recognize him because he didn't resemble his photos to the extent that I was expecting. He didn't look bad by any means, but I could tell that he used older pictures and edited them enough to where he seemed more appealing. I swear I'm not trying to sound superficial because he was cute, just not what I was expecting. But I also think we've hit a point in social media culture where it's safe to assume that we won't see the same thing in real life as we do online. And that's okay. We did hit it off. We discussed the usual first date stuff, then we got into more detail. I told him about back home and work, and how life was different than here in the States. At one point we were talking and holding hands, and I felt comfortable enough to let him kiss me. Well, he asked me as we were leaving if I wanted to go back to his place for a cup of coffee. I told him I knew what coffee really meant, and that I didn't want to do that on a first date. He assured me it would be 1 cup of coffee and that he would give me a lift home so that I didn't have to call an Uber. I accepted his offer and we walked to his apartment, which was a few blocks away. As we were going upstairs, he made a few questionable remarks. He mentioned how I wasn't like most girls because I accepted his invitation and alluded that you never know, I could be a psychopath. He then motioned with his eyes down to my dress and inquired about my breast size. I told him again that I was sorry, but the night would not end with him getting lucky. As we got into his unit, he dismissed himself to the toilet and left me sitting on his bed. It was a studio and he didn't have a couch. As I'm sitting there and waiting for him to finish doing whatever he was actually doing, I noticed in the corner by his bed that he had 2 masks. One was a cartoon-looking goat mask, and another was a cat, or maybe a tiger. What was more alarming was that he also had a Bowie knife and a small woodcutter's axe only a short distance away from them. Upon further observation, I also noticed there was a black jumper draped over a dresser. Then on his bedside table, there were a pair of latex gloves. Okay, I don't much feel like being murdered tonight. I got up and calmly left the unit. Then I made haste down the stairs and down the street where I was able to catch a lift. Now look, I may have just really hurt his feelings because he had no malicious intent, but if that's all that happened, then I prefer that over the possible alternative. All of these items alone wouldn't have been that bad, but all of these random items within a short walk from each other, I'd rather just not chance it. I do feel bad for leaving a person, but I don't feel bad about leaving what could have potentially been a dangerous situation. That along with his random personality change was enough for me to make the call that I made. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I just turned 21. I've lived in this apartment complex with my mom since 2016. People come and go. Most of the tenants have been here for a long time, though longer than we've been here. We have a nice, safe community and it's a nice old town. Everyone kind of knows each other. This guy moved in. I'm not sure when exactly. It's certainly been less than a year. His mom has been living here for a while and he recently moved in with her. I just learned yesterday with a very forced uncomfortable encounter that he's 40. This isn't my first encounter with him either. He approached me in January of this year asking me if I was single and calling me beautiful. I told him I wasn't looking for anything and that was that. He wasn't harsh with me or anything. 2 days ago, I heard this awful male voice furiously yelling outside. The same man was outside yelling at the top of his lungs because he thought he heard someone call him a crackhead. This isn't the first time he's yelled outside for everyone to hear. He's gotten in verbal fights with some other dude tenant living here. Anyways, after storming the parking lot yelling, he eventually went inside and started yelling at residents from the top of his balcony. I went out to get coffee yesterday. I get home. I was looking down at my phone to turn my loud music music off and I happened to look up. He's standing right outside of my car on my driver's side. I turn my car off and I open my door and he immediately starts crying. He started apologizing to me, saying that he's sorry if he hurt my feelings or offended me or my mom. I didn't get smart with him because I remembered how fast he snaps and gets angry. I was too nice, if anything. He then started telling me bits of his life story and how he's battling with depression and how he has a drug problem. He even goes on to tell me how he has a son. He then started telling me that he saw me leave and that he was looking through the blinds and saw me come back. He was saying how he felt like he had to come out and talk to me. He was watching me through the blinds. I feel absolutely awful. His apartment is right across the parking lot from ours, so he has a perfect view of us walking to our cars. I don't know what to do and I don't know where to turn. I want to move back in with my grandparents, and my mom won't move back in until one of them passes. We lived there with them for a really long time, and this apartment was the crown jewel of our freedom and independence. I understand why she doesn't want to go back, but I don't feel safe here. Last year, I had an experience with an obsessive ex showing up outside of my window in the night, so I have that on my radar, and now there's this guy. I don't want to live like this. I am so stressed and insanely paranoid. We do have Ring cameras. My mom is getting another one for the front window, but I hate that we have to live like this. My dad is in a different state and he lives in a gated neighborhood, but I don't feel entirely safe in his house. My 10-year-old little brother is on the autism spectrum amongst other things and has random, violent outbursts and gets physical. I feel I can never turn my back on him. They lock all their doors in the house and it's like Fort Knox over there. You go to the bathroom, lock the door. You go in the privacy of your own room, lock the door. It's insanity. I'm in college right now. I do have a game planned, but in the meantime, I'm here. I can't make sense of this incident, but it creeped me out. Around this time of year back then, I would walk a bike path daily to this little man-made waterfall and back. It ventured through several parks but was overall in a pretty urban area. It was around 3 to 4 in the afternoon on this day. The bike path dipped several times under street overpasses, and it's always a little spooky and sketch feeling directly in the center of the dip since it's like a little tunnel created by the overhead pass. Anyway, I was walking down the dip and I hear a bike coming down the hill fast behind me. I step further to the right but don't really look back and was startled at the fact that the cyclist practically grazed me as it passed instead of giving me a wide berth. I was kind of flustered and annoyed. It all happened so fast. Then the woman stopped a little bit ahead of me and started to look back at me, and I thought, oh, confrontation. But when she looked my direction, I realized the cyclist was actually just a really large child that I mistaken for an adult. It was still kind of dark where she stopped, so I couldn't fully see her expression, but she stayed still with her head facing me for several seconds. I could tell by her silhouette that she was indeed staring back at me. She was just frozen and silent, propped up on the bike with her foot out, and it creeped me out. I wondered if maybe she was nonverbal and just expressing frustration about our near collision in the only way she knew how. Anyway, I stopped walking towards her because it felt a little eerie, and I just gently waved or something in acknowledgement. I don't think I said hi or anything. I don't really remember. Anyway, she suddenly turned and pedaled off in the same direction I was headed. She wasn't with an adult or anyone that I could see. I kind of stopped thinking about it as I walked, as she just seemed like an annoyed kid. But as I got to the start of the trail, I noticed something under my car. The trail meets up with public parking, which happens to be at a public school lot. It briefly borders the parking lot, so I could see something under my car as I approached. I realized it was a bike, and to this day I'm still 95% sure it was the girl's bike. It was under the back of my car, like someone tried to lay it down flat and shove it under there. I still feel extremely disturbed remembering it because I can't for the life of me think of an explanation behind any of this. At the time, I was worried someone in the lot was watching me as I noticed the bike and removed it, but I didn't see anyone or have any problems as I left. I just leaned the bike against a tree and bailed. I didn't pay close attention to many details about the bike when I saw the girl because it was such a brief encounter, but I remember thinking it looked drab because it was white on gray, or something very plain. I guess I could be wrong about it being her bike, and it could have been a coincidence. I was 17, it was my graduation year, so all my time was devoted in studying and preparing to my exams. After school, I went to additional evening classes on the other side of the city. School ended at 2:30 in the afternoon. Courses started about 4 and ended at around 7, so I returned home quite late. Usually, I went home with a friend from additional courses, but this time somehow I ended alone. I am a daydreamy type of person, and I usually don't really pay attention to surroundings, so it was no shock when I bumped into a man while going on the sidewalk. I said I'm sorry and and kept going, but something felt strange. I understood that the man didn't respond, so I turned around to see what's wrong. Well, I expected some kind of response like it's okay, so I turned around and saw that he stayed still there where I bumped into him. His body was half turned to me and he silently stared in my eyes. I felt shivers down my back. I remembered that he was young, maybe 20 years old, with blonde short hair, and he wore a yellow-brown striped pullover and red scarf. It was early autumn, maybe September, chilly, but not cold yet. So he stared me in the eyes, then smiled, and slowly turned to me and started approaching. Silently, I was naive maybe, but not stupid to ask if everything is okay with him. Something was definitely not okay, so I turned away and quickly went away from him. But when I looked back, I saw that he was following me and kept staring right in my eyes. So I ran across the street, just right when the red light turned on, hoping that this strange man will stay back. But he just kept following me on the other side of the road, and he kept staring at me silently all the time. So I ran. It was not some suburbs district, but that day strangely there were no people around, so nobody really to help. And also, what would I say? Help. Some creep keeps looking at me and walking on the opposite side of the street. I ran as fast as I could with my zero physical ability and a heavy bag full of textbooks on my back. Next traffic light was already near, so I understood that the creep would probably cross the road to my side soon. But Subway was near too. I don't think I have ever ran so fast in my life. When light went green, I didn't even turn back because I felt that gaze on me. I just ran to the subway and jumped in the first available train. He didn't follow me to the subway, and I have never seen him again. Never told the police to, cause he didn't actually do anything. He didn't even talk to me. I've never heard his voice. This was still one of the most creepy and upsetting encounters I had. I, a 32-year-old woman, live in a pretty small town with one main grocery store. Last year, the store hired a new employee, a large, older man probably in his 50s. The guy would be stalking a certain part of the store, and he'd always strike up a conversation with me and try to talk to my kids. I would consider him overly friendly, but I am an introvert, so I thought maybe it was just me. I was polite but short. I think most people would have gotten that I clearly didn't want to be bothered. Well, one day, a few months ago, he approached me and told me that it was his last day on the job and that I should come visit him at his new job, which was kind of weird in and of itself because I do not know this person. I was relieved it was his last day because I always dreaded running into him. He just gave me a bad feeling, like he'd asked me over and over if I needed help after I already said no. He would also say weird things like that we were his favorite part of the day. It just made me uncomfortable. The following day, after his last day of working there, I had to run back to the store for a couple of things I'd forgotten. I saw him as soon as I entered and quickly turned away hoping to avoid him. I thought it was weird because he had said the previous day was his last day. I quickly walked through the store trying to get what I needed as fast as possible. I saw him down every other aisle. He looked like he was looking for me, like he was craning his head. I was picking up the last thing I needed when he quickly, practically running, came up and offered me some chips he was eating. I declined. He started talking to me, asking questions about how I was, what I was up to, the brand of chips he was eating. He was just trying to make conversation with me. Then he started saying that he expected to see me at his new job again. I made some non-committal comment. It was about to say have a nice day and walk away when he got very close, like inches from me, asked me how I was in a really weird way, and he was staring at my ring finger. I had taken off my wedding band when lifting weights that morning and forgot to put it back on. I said I'm good and started to push my cart forward when he freaky full-on hugged me. I do not know this person. I completely froze. I wish I'd made a scene. I wish I'd shoved him. I wish I'd yelled. I don't know why I just stood there. Who freaking walks up and hugs a stranger? He stood back and looked at me to see how I'd react. He winked at me and said have a good day and walked off. I should have started screaming at him. I started literally shaking and bolted down the next aisle and started crying. It felt gross. It felt like he was seeing how far he could push it. I was scared he'd follow me home or that he'd be in the parking lot, but he wasn't. I started crying when I told my husband about it. My husband was really ticked off at the nerve of that creep. He asked around about him at work, and some people that had gone to school with him said that I should be careful. It's such a small town, I frequently worry I'll run into him again. So I had a 23-year-old woman and live on my own. I just moved out to the area for school and went to my local Walmart to gather supplies for cleaning. As I walked in, I took note of an older man near the entrance that I briefly made eye contact with and nodded at and just kept walking. Looked at folders for a bit and then made my way towards the electronics section at the back to look for a charger. I was making my way through the aisles on the way down looking at the fall decorations. Lots of them were geared towards kids, so I just glanced at them quickly and turned around to leave. The same man was there. I didn't hear him walk into the aisle and was holding/inspecting some paper plates with childish Halloween designs on them for kids. I thought that was a little strange but brushed it off thinking he had grandkids. I left and made my way to the electronics section where they kept chargers behind locked glass doors. I'm there for about 7 to 8 minutes and the same old man shows up. At this point I'm pretty far from where I last saw him, and I see in the reflection in the glass that he is checking out my butt as he walks by. I brush it off because I'm used to men making quick glances like that in public and left it at that. He is looking at the display behind me at the other side, goes to leave, and then this is where it's creepy. He stands right behind me and starts aggressively eyeing me up and down while licking his lips, paying particular attention to my backside and my legs. He's bastardly undressing me with his eyes. At this point he was giving off massive creep vibes and I started shaky with adrenaline. I was alone in the aisle with him and was afraid he would try to grab me. I stay calm despite my throat feeling like it had a ball in it and wait for him to leave. He does. Then I go to a random aisle nearby electronics, but in the general part of the store, I noticed there were 2 men behind the electronics counter and wanted to stay near them if something went wrong, and waited a few minutes just standing there to see if he showed up. I wanted to confirm if he was following me or not. Sure enough, 5 minutes later there he was. I caught him quite literally speed walking down the main walkway, looking down each aisle as if frantically looking for me. He stopped dead, saw me notice him, and then promptly scurried off. Went to electronics section and informed them I was being followed and was not comfortable and asked if there was security. They don't have any, just theft prevention, and they offered to check me out there or accompany me to finish shopping. They were very kind and I took them up on the offer to get my cleaning supplies nearby. As we turned together, the same guy was standing further away staring. He literally just increased the radius he was using to follow me and was watching from the front by the registers now. I get my stuff, check out, and then weave through all of the clothing sections to leave from a different section than the one I originally entered in and saw him from. I didn't see him at all this whole time, got to my car, promptly drove to my new place, but stopped halfway at a random neighborhood. I pulled over and pretended that was my house to see if anyone tailed me, did not want this guy finding out where I lived, and then drove home when I didn't see anyone. I may be overreacting, but this is a new area to me and I've never had someone be quite that creepy and persistent in following me. I've done things on my own plenty of times and never had an issue. This all happened in the middle of the day at like 3 in the afternoon too. I was wearing loose clothing and just wanted to make a quick trip in and out. I have no idea what could have happened if I didn't notice or what his intentions might have been. I can't imagine they were good. Maybe he would have followed me to my new place. Who knows? Either way, the whole encounter was scary. He had no clue I saw his reflection and the nasty expression on his face. This happened a couple of years ago. I, a 26-year-old woman, was walking my dog in my local field. It was dark but it wasn't late. It was winter time in the United Kingdom, so it was maybe 6 in the afternoon. The field is mainly used for rugby football but is completely free to walk through whenever. It is also surrounded by houses and street lights on the roads, but the field itself is dark, so I had brought a torch with me, mainly so I didn't trot in any dog poop. I've come in one entrance of the field and I'm following a path that leads to another exit/entrance. I use the field to make a loop back around onto the road and back to my house, giving my dog some off-lead time whilst in the field. Anyway, as I'm walking up the field, I notice a figure walk in the exit/entrance I was going to use to leave. I keep my eye on this figure as they have very dark clothing on and their hood up. I'm shining my torch as I'm walking, so I know the person knows I'm there as it's very obvious. At first I wasn't nervous, more so just being vigilant. My dog is a wonderful German Shepherd, so as you can imagine I feel pretty safe with her. It wasn't until I saw the person duck down behind a bush/tree. There is lots of new trees/bushes planted sporadically up the part of the field that isn't used for sports that I absolutely froze. I was about 200 feet from the exit but would have to walk past the bush they hid behind to get to it. I call my dog over and get her back on the lead so she is close. By this point she is also hyper alert due to the person behind the bush. With that, I hear a weird, high-pitched voice that sounded like they were saying my dog's name. I assume they heard me call her. They said it 3 to 4 times in this longed out high-pitched voice. It's clearly coming from the person hiding. Luckily, my dog wasn't reacting to it as it probably barely sounded like her name to her. I had a moment of shall I fight or flight. Either I, 1, run past the bush and try for the exit, or 2, turn around and run back into the dark field and make for the other exit, a lot further away, or 3, confront this person. My dog at this point hackles up, ears up, and is very alert in front of me, all while still maintaining a wonderful sense of calm. I went with number 3. I confronted that guy. I mustered up every bit of courage and confidence I had and shouted at the top of my voice, "What are you doing?" The hooded man came out from the bush very quickly without saying anything, and I said the same thing again. What are you doing trying to scare a young woman? I'm so glad my voice didn't shake/break when I said it, as I really was terrified at this point. He started to stutter and said, Oh, I thought you were someone I knew. I answered back and said, who hides from someone they think they know in a dark field. After that, he apologized a couple times and continued to skulk down the rest of the field, and I made for a swift exit with my dog. God knows what his intentions were. Maybe he thought I had a smaller dog and was going to try attack me. Maybe he saw my dog and realized, no chance. Or maybe he really did think I was someone he knew. Whatever it was weird and scary. For the last couple of years, I have been dealing with a creep who lives on my street. This street is a through road, and the creep lives about 1 block down on the other side of the street from me. It started with him trying to speak to me when I was walking my dogs. I walked around the corner of a building and he was there in front of me. He seemed kind of awkward, and I said hi in response to his greeting and kept walking. But then he was at the same place the following morning. When he was there on the 3rd day, I realized that he wasn't walking and we happened to see each other. He was waiting at that spot, so I decided to walk a bit earlier. That worked okay for about a week. Then he was there again. I adjusted my route to avoid that spot. Again, that lasted about a week. I turned into a side street around a high fence and there he was. I again changed the timing of my walk and he worked it out after about a week. I kept changing things up for the next few months and periodically would see him when walking. About that time, I hurt my foot. While I was recovering, my husband was walking the dogs instead of me. Then I happened to be in the local supermarket on the weekend and the creep is there. I keep seeing him as I'm walking around and he queued up behind me at the register and tries talking to me. I got out of the store really fast while he was being checked out and left. Now I should add that at this stage, the creep seemed to me to possibly have an intellectual disability, but I wasn't thinking creep back then. I felt sorry for him. He seemed lonely. I am now aware that my judgment is off as a result of childhood traumas, but back then just thought that I needed to avoid him. So I'm back walking and I continue to change the times that I walk in my route. Occasionally I would see him, but generally I managed to avoid him. My husband and I then moved out of our home for a few months because the roof needed replacing and asbestos was found which had to be removed. We lived with family during this time. I don't think the creep has a car because I rarely saw him during this period. When I did see him, it was outside the supermarket elsewhere in town or near my work. When we moved back home, several months went by that I didn't see him when I was walking. I thought that thankfully he had lost interest. Then, when I least expected it, he comes seemingly out of nowhere and he's right in front of me. I can't cross the street at that point and my only options are to keep walking and get past him or to turn around and go back the way I came. Turning around with a dog on a lead can be tricky, so I just keep going. I don't make eye contact and move as fast as I can without running. As I'm passing, he says, "Good morning, sexy. How are you, gorgeous?" Although I wasn't confident the police would take me seriously, I went to the police. I am very grateful to the young officer who spoke to me. He acknowledged that up until that morning when the creep called me sexy, it was a bit iffy whether they could have got a restraining order. But with that plus his past behaviors and my attempts to mitigate the situation, the police would apply for a court order to stop him. I only knew his first name and address, but they were able to work out his full name and it was on my copy of the application paperwork. It has taken a few months, but he didn't contest the application and the personal safety order has been made. He is not permitted to approach me or attempt to speak to me, and he is not to walk on the footpath past my house. He can walk on the other side of the street. Unfortunately, he has continued to walk past my house and I sometimes see him when I am out walking, which I am noting and reporting to the police every time he does. But he has not spoken to me since the order was made. So all in all, a pretty low level creep, right? Rug. I was sorting through old paperwork at work the other day as my office shreds and bins anything 7 years or older unless we need to keep it longer. I found a note that the creep had come into my work 7 years earlier, giving a different address and had spoken with me. Later, when I called him about his inquiry, he became inappropriate, that's what the note says, and was told the business would not be dealing with him anymore. Now I'm wondering if he moved to his current address because it was just down the street from my house. This happened about 6 years ago to me. I was a 20-year-old woman at the time and 2 other friends. I was 14 at the time of this story and we were seeing the new COMPILATIon. This was my second time seeing it, but I was super excited because my mom had decided that I could finally start getting dropped off when I hung out with friends instead of her accompanying us. After she dropped us off, we went inside, got our tickets and snacks at the concessions, then went to decide where we wanted to sit. This was before there was the assigned seating and you could just sit wherever you wanted. Of course, being teens and wanting to be on our own, we sat in the back so we would not interrupt the other movie watchers with our snickering and jokes. There weren't that many people there, maybe like 3 groups of kids and various other adults around them, but I did not pay much attention to them. We just wanted to be our own. Soon after we were settled, the trailer started and that's when he walked in. I did not pay much attention to him though, but I still noted that he was the last person to enter the theater. I can still remember exactly how he looked to this day. He must have been in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was Caucasian, had dark eyes, reddish/brown hair, and short beard. He was wearing running shoes, jeans, a white baseball hat, and a jacket over a shirt. He did a quick scan of the theater and he stopped with his head in our direction and started making his way up the steps, all the while he remained fixated on us. We were 1 row from the very back and he sat directly in front of us, right in front of my friend who was sat in the middle. This was the first more noticeable red flag. Soon after that the movie started. I immediately tried to focus it on the movie, but not long after it started, the man started twisting his hat so at times it faced forwards, then backwards on his head. That would not have been a problem if it wasn't for the fact that every time he adjusted his hat he would completely turn his head to stare at us, then smirk for a few seconds, then turn back. It continued on like this for almost the entirety of the first half of the movie. He would then giggle to himself quietly even if the movie was in no way comedic. The vibes were just so off on this guy, bordering on sinister. By then I had completely lost interest in the movie and remained unfocused on what he was doing. Soon enough he changed creep tactics, and every time the movie characters told a joke or said something remotely funny he would full on belly laugh and turn around toward us while laughing and making direct eye contact with each of us. And after he got tired of that one he would stand straight up and rotate to face us, smile creepily, then sit back down. I was literally so tensed up that I had stopped eating my candy, and now my friends had started exchanging uneasy glances with me, and I could tell that they were just as uncomfortable as I remember clearly my friend on my left grabbing my arm as the movie was getting closer to the end and whispering my name nervously with widened eyes. I replied with, "I know, I have been watching him." I had decided to start coming up with a plan. I already knew that the employees here were unreliable, so I decided to trust the only other thing I could think of without my mom there. It was almost the end of the movie and I turned and grabbed both my friends' arms and whispered to them as quietly as I could, "Guys, the moment the credits start I want y'all to run to the bathroom and I am going to call my mom to come in here and get us." "Okay." They nodded, both looking as terrified and uneasy as I felt. About 5 minutes later the credits started, and the moment they did, we bolted as quietly as we could. Of course in my mind every horror movie scenario was playing in my head with me being the last to leave the row, so when I got to the bottom of the stairs I decided to do the dumbest thing I could have done. Go easy on me, I was young and stupid and scared. I stopped and turned around as my friends ran ahead of me to the bathrooms. The theater was empty now, except for him in our row crawling around and looking under the seats. This felt like it lasted for a couple of minutes but could not have been more than a couple of seconds. I was just petrified. I couldn't move at that moment, but believe me I started moving again when his head popped up from the end of the row, and after a jerk motion scan of the room his eyes focused on me. I swear his eyes were so wide I could see the whites from all the way down there. That's when he got up and started running, and so did I. I bolted out of there, skidding on the slick carpet, and shot my way to the women's bathroom, which was 4 theater entrances ahead of me. I could see my friend peeking out the side of the entrance as I got closer. I noticed that my other friend was not accompanying her. After I could speak again and was semi-breathing normally we headed deeper into the stalls, and I shakily asked her where our friend went. She told me that instead of running into the bathroom she shot off to the concessions where there are sometimes employees. This might have been my first option if I didn't know my theater well enough to know that it was a 50-50 chance for any employees to be there at that moment. We then calmed down a bit more, for we were now in the nosier and crowded bathrooms surrounded by other people and adults. After like 4 minutes, we decided to take a peek out of the entrance to see if he was there. And I kid you not, this dude was pacing back and forth in front of the entrance with the most angry look on his face, staring directly at me when I poked my head out. I still don't know why I didn't tell any of the women around us what was happening. We finally called my mom, close to tears, and told her what was happening. She immediately left the store she was at to come pick us up as she could hear we were very upset. After waiting a minute more we decided to take another look outside, and thank God he was gone. We saw our friend standing near the front of the theater next to an employee. Turns out she had just been standing by the worker and watching the man run in my direction, then pace in front of the bathroom, then finally leave. She never said anything to the worker, which I thought was stupid then, and thinking back it's even stupider. But we were dumb. We waited for my mom to get there around the employee who never said anything to us and was probably confused. We finally saw her car pull up and raced out to it and told her to drive out of there quickly. After telling her what happened, she told us we were probably overreacting and he maybe thought we were cute and we were the ones who misunderstood the situation. Still kind of pissed at her for that. Very ignorant of a very knowledgeable and usually understanding woman, but maybe she was trying to comfort us. I don't know. All I know is that man did not have good intentions and we had every right to be as afraid as we were. Just thinking about it gives me the same goosebumps as I had in that theater. I know that if I saw him today, I would know exactly who he is. Stay safe, always trust your instincts. Even if you think you're overreacting, they're usually right. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Many years ago, before cell phones, a 20-year-old woman, had driven over to visit my grandmother and was on my way home. She lived in a very nice part of town. I had only recently got my driver's license, and in my state, you are required to display P plates in your car windows. The P stands for probationary, but we used to say pick on me or pervert magnet plates. In other words, just displaying those plates on your car pretty much guaranteed you were going to be hassled on the road as a young person. And also, if you drove a small white sedan, you were likely to be female, all the more reason to be hassled on the road back then. So I turned out of my grandmother's street onto the highway. There was no traffic on the highway when I turned onto it, and I had driven no more than 300 meters when I heard this sudden loud honky right behind me, frightening the bleep out of me. I stuck my arm out the window and waved a circle signal, motioning to pass me, in case the driver thought I was going too slow, which I wasn't. The car then pulled out and began driving right next to me. All of a sudden, this creepy older looking man in an expensive plain white sedan honked again and was motioning at me to pull over to the side of the road and wind my window down. I mouthed no at him. He got more insistent and looked angry as he continued driving right next to me, which is also illegal because he was blocking the entire highway. So creepy man let off a couple more short honks to make me look at him again and flashed this black wallet with some sort of raised metal, silver looking crest on it. He was now looking ragingly angry and was pointing at the shield wallet in his hand, like he thought it meant he was some sort of secret police and had some sort of authority to pull me over. As far as I was concerned, I had not done anything wrong. He was not police. My car was recently serviced, so I knew there was nothing wrong with it. There was no possible reason for this creepy looking guy to pull me over, and I was starting to feel more than a little frightened. I decided to brake suddenly so I could read his car's rear license plate in case he tried to run me off the road or something. In a split-second decision, I chucked an immediate left turn off the highway and drove fast down a few back streets and laneways. This was the area I had grown up in, walking around with my grandmother, so I knew exactly where I was going. I was so creeped out I did not check my rearview mirror for a couple of turns, so I had no idea if the guy tried to follow me or if he just took off down the highway. But either way, I lost him. Went to work on the Monday and told the story, and one of my older colleagues said to me that is a consular license plate, which means that the car belongs to a foreign embassy. Intriguing, but I didn't give it much thought, except in later years retelling the tale when I wanted to explain to people why I have a chip on my shoulder when it comes to middle-aged male drivers. I was at Walmart earlier this evening with my two daughters, one elementary school aged and the other middle school. We looked around the school supplies for a minute and then rounded the corner to see the Halloween candy on display. As we turned the corner, a slightly older guy came to really close to us like he was in a hurry and almost ran into our cart. He didn't have a cart or any items. I said, "Oh, excuse me," and then stopped in front of the candy to let my youngest ask a bunch of questions about the candy pumpkins. The man stopped quickly and started rummaging around the candies right next to my daughter. He was listening to our conversation and reacted strange when my daughter said she wanted to take a picture of the candy. He was twitchy and caught my eye and looked away quickly. We moved on to the women's pajama section to look around for a few minutes, and I noticed the same man pass by really close again. He was turning to the right toward the shoes with a big bag of candy cradled in his arms. My girls went across the aisle to the boys' clothing section while I finished deciding, and when I was catching up with him a couple minutes later, that guy was winding through the boys' clothes toward my daughters. He paused and looked confused or lost, but still like he was in a rush, and watched me discuss sizes with my youngest. This is when I started thinking something was off with this dude. I mentioned him to my older daughter, and then we moved through the partition into the girls' clothes. I didn't see him again for a few minutes, and I figured it was nothing, but then he came into that section and was acting like he was trying to pick out just a shirt. He still had that big bag of candy that he kept adjusting his grip on. I kept seeing him take quick peeks at my girls, but then every time he saw me watching him, he pretended to be occupied in his shopping. I told my oldest that I thought he was following us, and she said she noticed the same thing, and I made my youngest get in the cart so I could keep them both close. They both like to wander a bit. The guy then walked out of the girls section, passing close behind me, but he looped around the partition back into the boys section and stopped at an opening on the other side, but still in a straight line of sight. He caught my eye again and twitched, then he pulled out his phone, texted someone, and walked away. By that time, I was on high alert and possibly getting quite paranoid. I looked around and saw two other slightly older men standing around. One was in electronics, kind of looking at a half-empty display of something, but I swear he glanced at me several times even though there were 3 or 4 racks of clothes in a hallway with occasional people in between. The third guy had wandered into the girls section and was apparently considering buying a Justice shirt too. Every time he saw me notice him watching us, he wandered down to the baby aisles, but he kept coming back after a couple minutes. I realized now looking back that if I suspected something bad, I should have gotten my girls out of there. Clothes shopping for a picky preteen isn't fun, and I wanted to get it done and over with. On top of that, I kept second guessing myself that the 2 other guys were just a coincidence. I kept my girls really close, and after we moved to the women's section, I didn't see any of them again, and I stopped feeling creepily that we were being watched. Now it's the middle of the night, and I'm pretty freaked out wondering what could have happened if I didn't notice the first guy and continued to let my girls wander around. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.